All right, let me just. Hey, everybody, we're just getting set up here. We had a little bit of a time confusion there going on, so we're going to get our screen set up, and we're going to get everybody going here on our debate tonight on the war in Ukraine. So stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back with you. All right, we're just getting set up here. All right, everyone, we're just waiting for Drew. He's just trying to get a little live share going here, and then we're gonna get going. Alrighty. Excellent. We're just waiting here. And once we're ready to get going, we will. So everybody, thanks for coming on out tonight. We're going to be debating, is Russia's war in Ukraine justified? We're going to get going with that in just 1 minute here. We're just waiting for Drew to get his system set up here. I got a ring coming in from James here. Oh, I just missed it. I'm sorry, James. I'm sorry about that, buddy. So yeah, we'll keep this up here for now. I know I was on the Discord there earlier, and somebody wasn't too pleased about the fact that I was saying "kick it over" often. So I'm going to try to say that as much as possible. This debate in honor of that lovely critique. Drew, I don't. Sorry, not Drew. You got him up on your screen there. Jackson, are you trying to say something, or are you talking to your? Okay. And Jackson, just make sure we can hear you. Okay. And Drew, are you ready? Well, let's just give everybody a second here, because you know how technology can be, and be a lot of fun. Uh, Oh, we're getting spicy right off the bat, everybody. Awesome. Drew, are you able to get your camera on and get connected? Oh, well, we'll just give him a moment here. We'll reintroduce the debate here once we get going here, and this will all get clipped for the live. But I'm gonna do a lot of kicking it over to you, there, Jackson, or kicking it over to you, Drew, just for the sake of our lovely criticism that I got there in my Discord earlier. Hey, everybody! If you want to let me know in the live chat, you can hear Jackson, correct? When he's speaking, you can hear him, right? Here, Jackson, can you speak a little bit?
Test 1, 2, 3, 4.
I think that's working. All right, everybody. Once again, so sorry. We're just waiting for Drew, and then we're gonna get going with what our topic is tonight, which is Russia's war on Ukraine justified? So I see your super chats coming in there. Yeah, definitely. We're going to be doing a Q&A at the end of this. Just make sure that your super chats are related to our topic and not attacks against our speakers. That would be great. I know Jackson's got his own live stream going on there. So if you see him talking, it's probably because he's talking to his own viewership right now. So I don't have him on mute.
I'm back.
All right. Just reminding
Drew's back.
All right.
Finally.
And it looks like Drew is here as well. So I'm going to go over to my own window right quick, and I'm going to introduce our topic, and then we will get going, all right? I'm just going to cut off my live thing here so that it doesn't look like I am James. I mean, I could be, but you never know. Hey, everybody. Tonight we're going to be debating, is Russia's war on Ukraine justified? And we're going to start right now. And to get us started, we have two speakers here tonight. And Jackson, from what I understand, you're going to kick us off with the affirmative. So, Jackson, we are going to kick it over to you to start us off. Thanks so much for being here, everybody. And let's go. Let's take it away. Thanks, Jackson.
Yes, I put out the offer to any and all individuals to come to a debate and try to conquer the argument that Russia is they're very base. Putin, his SMO, while it's unfortunate, it is justified. And I'd have to say that, this argument has been deliberated many, many times. And that's why Drew, in his last debate with my friend Haas of the Infrared Show, he kept trying to take the conversation away from this century. But anyways, I think that it's quite clear. I mean, Putin, throughout his time in office, even right back to when he first took power, he made efforts to try and work with the West rather than against it. He didn't come off, within his first days of his presidency having an adversarial mind to the U.S. He tried to join NATO. He tried to join the EU. And then, after there was several coup attempts in Ukraine, 2004, 2014, that were backed by the West in an effort to draw Russia into a civil war in the Donbas, which we're now effectively seeing. Putin tried to establish peace because those who were rising up in the Donbas, the civilians there in the Donbas, they tried to say, we don't respect, we don't recognize this government that was installed in a U.S.-backed coup in 2014. And because they said they didn't recognize it, and because they were trying to achieve autonomy, the Kiev authorities that were then heavily, comprised of Nazi and nationalist figures, now not as much, but from 2014 to 2019, definitely were so. They started to wage a campaign of violence and asymmetrical warfare against those individuals that were fighting for their freedom in the Donbass. Putin tried to stop all of the warfare through the Minsk Accords, the Minsk II Accords, to no avail. And the lead up to the Russian SMO, we saw a dramatic increase of shelling. OSCE independent international monitors recognized that there was a sharp increase in shelling against the Russian-aligned Donbas separatists directly when that was taking place in the final days prior to February 24th, from February 16th to February 24th. And then Putin launched the SMO. He's done a great job of trying to limit civilian casualties while still achieving the goals of demilitarization and denazification. And it appears as though my stream may have disconnected. Let me just see here if it's still good. I think we might still be good. Okay, I'm going to continue. Last thing I'll say here is maybe it did get us. No, we're still alive. Okay. Last thing I'll say here. On many occasions, Putin has tried to establish peace with Ukraine through the Israeli negotiations, the Turkish negotiations, the Chinese peace proposal, all of which has been denied and rejected by the Kiev authorities, some of which was denied after trying to make some actual solid ground on those peace proposals and negotiations. The Israeli and Turkish negotiations came close to actually ending all this madness, but the UK stepped in and said no to Zelensky. He's not allowed to negotiate. And that's where we find ourselves now. Putin is still saying that, you know, if you come to the table with something other than forcing all of our troops out of the Donbas and taking Crimea and deposing myself, Vladimir Putin, then we might be able to get somewhere. But Zelensky refuses at every step. So the war continues.
Right, if that's everything from you there, Jackson, we're going to let Drew have his opening statement there in accordance to that. I just want to remind everybody in the live chat that both of our speakers are going to be linked in our description below. So if you like what you're hearing from Drew or Jackson tonight, make sure to check them out. And without further ado, over to you, Drew.
I mean, listen, what we're hearing from Jackson is straight projection. The Russian propagandists like to accuse the victims of their aggression of the very crimes that they are guilty themselves of committing. So Russia invades Ukraine in an attempt to depose the government, force a regime on the Ukrainian people. They invaded with kill lists in all the areas that they occupied. They killed civilian leaders. They kidnapped and tortured and murdered civic leaders, civic activists, the families of civic activists and leaders. It is a war of extermination and genocide. Putin is very clear about it. He talks about the war in terms of the great Tsars of the past. He talks about returning lands that are primordial Russian lands. It is a war of conquest. It cannot be even more clear than it already is that this is a war of conquest. If you look at all the propagandists of the Russian regime, if you look at people like Dugan, who outright called for a genocide of the Cretan, that is his words. He said, the only solution is to kill Ukrainians. I'm telling you to this as a professor. That was Dugan's statement. Dugan has called for a genocide of the Cretan, calling the Ukrainians a race of sewer dwellers. The Putin regime apparatchiks, they talk about this as a war of conquest. They openly support genocide. You have Russian regime propagandists who say that the only solution is to kill those with Ukrainian national consciousness. So they are very open about this. They say the only solution is to exterminate those who believe in the Ukrainian nation. And so no matter how many fudges that Jackson and the Russian propagandists try and introduce to the debate, oh, it's about NATO, blah, 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 Putin himself tells the world every day he is returning to the tradition of the Tsars. He is conquering lands that used to be Russian and will always be Russian in his mindset. There is nothing the Ukrainians can do. He insists that they cannot be a nation. He believes that they must exist only subordinated to the Russian regime. So Putin believes that Ukrainians cannot exist as a nation, have never existed as a nation. He compares himself to Peter the Great. They talk about taking back their lands. It is a war of reaction. It is a war of imperial conquest. And blah, 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 NATO, blah, 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 NATO expansion, Victoria Nuland, Euromaidan, blah, 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 all the stupid lies and propaganda smears that Jackson will try and introduce into the debate. Fundamentally, this is simply about the Ukrainians insisting on their own nationhood, their own independence as a people and a country, as their own culture. You know, Kiev is hundreds of years older than Moscow. Ukraine existed as a country before Russia existed as a country. Ukraine has always been an entity in its own right that is not Russian, and the Russian propagandists hate that. They insist that Ukraine cannot exist. They must destroy Ukraine if it exists in its own independent entity. If it exists as an independent entity, it must be destroyed. And that is the fundamental idea that is driving the war of imperial conquest. If the Ukrainians exist, they must be destroyed. They must be returned to a position as subordinate to the Russian Empire, as slaves. And fundamentally, Jackson is arguing for the enslavement of an entire people to the whims of the Russian Imperial Empire. And that is why what he supports is genocide and brutality, torture, rape, the rape of civilians. Every day now, Ukrainian civilians are being tortured. They're being bombarded in terror raids. Just the other day, we saw footage of terrified Ukrainian schoolchildren in Kiev running as the missile raid sirens went up overhead. And so Jackson can yell about NATO expansion. He can, fudge the debate with, blah, 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 the Euromaidan coup. But fundamentally, what he is supporting is the terrorization of those school children running for the bomb shelters. As we saw the other day, every single massacre and atrocity that we see, the Bucha atrocities, the massacres of civilians, that is fundamentally what Jackson supports. And he may say that this is about protecting the Russian speakers of Ukraine, blah, 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 the people of the Donbas spontaneously rising up. And yet it is the sad irony of the so-called special military operation that it is the Russian speakers of Ukraine who have been most brutalized and tortured and destroyed and brutalized by the Russian regime. It is the Russian-speaking cities that are being bombarded and razed to the ground, Mariupol, Bakhmut, all these cities that have been basically razed to the ground. And Putin says, this is about supporting the Russian speakers. And yet probably the victims, probably the people who've been most victimized in Ukraine are the Russian speakers. They are the ones who have primarily dealt with the terror bombing raids, the murder, the torture. And this is what Jackson supports, everybody. This is what Jackson supports. Every time that the civilians of Ukraine are tortured and hounded and bombarded, then this is what he supports. And he will talk all about, America's illegal interventions in the past, the Iraq war, Serbia, blah, blah, blah. And yet fundamentally, it is Russia here that is waging a war of imperial aggression. This is Russia invading a sovereign nation, trying to depose its government, trying to destroy an independent nation and culture. Everything he accuses the United States government of doing, this is what Russia is doing right now as we speak, and he's defending it.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for Drew and Jackson for your intro statements there. Just want to let everybody know we do have a poll in the live chat. Was Russia war justified in their war on Ukraine? So everybody get your votes in there. We're going to kick it into an open discussion there between Drew and Jackson. Just want to remind everybody that we're doing a Q&A at the end of this conversation. So if you have any questions related to the subject is Russia's war on Ukraine justified, throw it in the live chat and we'll read it out, and you can get some more detailed insight into what our speakers are thinking on these subjects. So without further ado, Drew and Jackson, we're going to kick it into open discussion. We usually kick it over to the other side. So Jackson, I'll let you kick it off for our open discussion, okay?
Brilliant. So, Drew, do you think that Ukraine should give their territory back to the Mongols?
Stupid, non-debate.
Why?
Just bullshit. Just
Why?
Straight up bullshit. No matter, you will try, as I said, Jackson is going to try and fudge with all these stupid propaganda smears and lies and turnarounds, and is going to try and introduce false dichotomies and confuse everyone. This is the style of Russian propaganda. What do you think about the Mongols? What do you think about Ukraine giving land back to the Mongols? No, the fundamental here is Russia is invading a sovereign nation. It's trying to destroy an independent country. a government that was elected by the Ukrainian people. They are trying to destroy that, and Russia talks about
jibber
Ukraine as
jabber,
never
jibber
existing
jabber.
as an independent entity in its own right.
Yeah, let's kick it back over to Jackson.
It's just a bunch of jibber jabber. So you made the argument that Kiev was present before Moscow, but you failed to mention that Kiev was Kiev and Rus, which was like they were the early founders of Russia. So you failed to mention that they just had a different capital. But I mean, why, if that's your argument or part of your argument, I'm not going to straw man you and say that's your whole argument. But if that's part of your argument, couldn't you just as well make the argument that because the Mongols controlled Ukraine, that Ukraine should hand it back over to the Mongols?
The Mongols did not control Ukraine, Jackson. This is just stupid history on your part. The Mongols controlled Russia.
Should Russia give? You're right. They controlled Kiev and Rus, as you put it. Okay, so we're done with that point. As for Ukraine being a sovereign country, because you failed to answer that question. As for Ukraine being a sovereign country, how do you couple that with your argument about Poland in World War II if the sovereign government of Ukraine was deposed in a US-backed coup? They illegally couped the president, Yanukovych.
No, it was not an illegal coup. Yanukovych was turning his snipers on the Ukrainian people. He sent the thuggish riot police to brutalize teenagers on the Euromaidan, on the Maidan Square. It was not an illegal coup by any means. Yanukovych fled the country after the parliament voted against him. So he fled the country to Russia in exile. This is a thug. Before he ever took power, he was involved in the theft of state resources in Ukraine. He was originally a gangster. He served time for assaults and robberies. This was a gangster. He was backed by Putin. And when he lost in 2004, he tried to poison his opponent. He lost in 2004, came back, and when he came to power, he was deposed in a popular revolution because he sent his riot police thugs onto the Maidan Square to terrorize teenagers, and then they turned the snipers on civilians. And how many Ukrainian civilians were kidnapped from the Maidan Square and tortured, and their bodies were found later frozen in the woods, tortured to death by Yanukovych's thugs. This was no coup by any means. He fled the country after losing popular support. He feared what would happen to him after he turned snipers on the Ukrainian people and killed innocent people. And he probably didn't want to spend his life in prison. And so he fled to Russia, his patrons, and he fled. He actually left the country without a government because he fled to Russia.
Well, okay, we'll get to that. We've got a lot to break down already, but we'll get to that part. So do you know what the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada stated requirements, their constitutional requirements are for an impeachment?
I understand that the impeachment process was perhaps it did not meet the constitutional requirements, but also what is the Ukrainian constitutional what does the Ukrainian constitution say when the president flees the country to Russia? I mean, he also abandoned his duties. He abandoned the country. He fled to Russia. The impeachment vote may not have gotten the 2/3 majority it was required. But what does the Ukrainian constitution say when the president flees the country for Russia?
So first of all, your final answer is that you need a 2/3 majority to impeach the sitting president of Ukraine?
I will leave it up to you, Jackson, on that one.
No, I'm just asking because that's what you just said.
Well, I mean, you're going to have little small gotchas. Oh, Drew got a small fact here and there incorrect.
Well, it's not really a small fact.
The fundamental thing here is that Yanukovych fled the country. Did he not?
If that's a small fact, I don't think that's a small fact, because if I'm wrong about that, then the Verkhovna Rada would have met the constitutional requirement to impeach Yanukovych in 2014. Unfortunately for you,
the Constitution says nothing about when the president turns snipers on the people. The Constitution says nothing.
We can talk about that too, Drew. We can talk about that too.
Ukrainian civilians in an episode of mass repression. So Yanukovych violated the Ukrainian Constitution first.
Drew, have the authorities in the United States or Australia, to be honest, I don't know Australia, but have the authorities in the United States ever faced a coup or anyone called for a coup against authorities in the United States for killing unarmed civilian protesters here?
There is no coup, Jackson. There is no coup. You're going to get it. You're trying to bog down the debate.
Okay, has anyone been impeached?
The legal minutiae of the Ukrainian constitution. No, the fundamental is Yanukovych fled the country after trying to murder civilians. And when he wasn't able to murder enough civilians to remain in power, he fled the country to Russia. And that is the fundamental here. That is what started the war in Ukraine. Russia invaded straight after. And Dugan started up saying we need a genocide of the Cretan. The Ukrainians are a sewer race. That this is what the Russian propagandists immediately started pushing. And then Gherkin went into Sloviansk with his people. It was a Russian-backed operation. He was working on behalf of Malafeev, the Russian oligarch who's close to Putin. The entire operation in the Donbas, there was no spontaneous revolution. This was always from the start a Russian-backed military operation. Gherkin, in fact, was talking about creating a Transnistria-style operation in the Donbas years before.
Okay, so I mean, like, I want to have a conversation with you because if you can teach me something I don't know, I would be surprised about this because I feel like I've studied a lot. But if we're going to have a conversation, it can't just be me asking you a question or me saying something brief and then you going on for like 5 minutes about the entire history, your history of the events over the past, 8 years. So let's just keep it relatively simple. The Verkhovna Rada says that to impeach a sitting president of the country, Ukraine, you have to get 3/4 majority, not 2/3 majority, as you said, to impeach the president. They were 10 votes short. So now you're saying, well, maybe it wasn't a legal, technically impeachment, right? But, this is warranted because Yanukovych had fled the country. So tell me, what day did the vote of the impeachment take place?
Listen, Jackson, I'm not going to be bogged down in the Euromaidan coup narrative. I'm not going to let you bog down the debate.
That's what you're just talking about.
This is fundamentally, Jackson, this is fundamentally a question of, is Russia's current terror bombing strategy in Kiev, is its current torture, murder, bombardment of Ukrainian civilians across the country, is that justified? It has nothing to do with Euromaidan. Even if in your crazy narrative you were able to prove that it was a coup, it would not justify Russia's terror campaigns against the Ukrainian citizenry, its brutal war of aggression, imperial conquest. And even if it is about the Euromaidan, even in your narrative, it was the Euromaidan, blah, blah, blah. How does that relate to Putin comparing himself to Peter the Great, talking about recovering lost Russian lands? What does that have to do with the Euromaidan?
Good point. We'll get to that. So you don't know what day the impeachment vote took place?
Jackson, I'm not getting bogged down in.
Well, no, you brought up Drew. You brought up listen, Drew.
Well, I'm sorry to cut you guys off. I don't want to place any mutes, but where we did just do kind of like a cross-examination from your end, Jackson, what we'll do, just because Drew did kind of answer a lot of questions there, and I know he got to talk for a little bit, we'll let Drew ask his question, and then we're going to let you speak for a little bit there. Okay, Jackson? Okay. All right, so you can ask your question.
What's the question, Drew? Because you just asked me, how does that connect to, Peter the Great, right? That was your question?
Well, no, not Peter the Great. What I'm saying is every day now you see Putin comparing himself to the former Tsars, and he's talking about recovering lost Russian lands, and the Russian propagandists say that there is no such thing as a Ukrainian independent state. Ukraine has always been subordinated to Russia. Ukraine and Russia have always been one. There's no such thing as any type of.
So where's the question?
So my question is, given the Russian regime is clear about the war being about imperial conquest and clear that it is about ending the independence of Ukraine, what does that have to do with Euromaidan and your narrative of the Euromaidan in 2014?
I must have missed those points that Putin made in his opening speech on February 24th, because I heard him talk about demilitarization of the NATO armament in Ukraine and denazification. And now that I answered your question, because imperial conquest was never a stated goal or anything like that, I just have to point out the reason why I was asking the question about the date in which the impeachment vote took place, that the impeachment vote, which fell 10 votes short, was because when I brought up that point, you said, well, it does, even if it was illegal, it doesn't matter because Yanukovych had already fled the country. Unfortunately for you, that's neither true. The impeachment vote took place on February 22nd of 2014. On February 23rd, Yanukovych was in Kharkov, so he was still in Kharkov on the day after it took place, which means he was in Ukraine once this took place, and they failed to impeach him. And then on February 25th, Yanukovych, 2 days later after the impeachment vote, he arrived in Crimea, which at the time was also Ukraine, and the new government was installed on the 25th. So you said that, the coup, legitimate or not,
what date? What date was
what?
the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014?
Well, that's not relevant to this point I'm making right here.
Why is that not relevant? We're talking about the legitimate process by which Ukraine changes government. Okay, what did Russia invade Ukraine in 2014? It was February 24th, 4 days after.
I'll answer your question if you let me talk. Because if the sovereign government is being deposed in a violent Western-backed coup, and the people who are speaking out against this coup are being brutalized, they're being killed, those participating in Maidan were killed by Georgian snipers at the behest of Ukraine to make this look worse than it actually was.
That is actually insane.
It's true, though. It's true. So if a sovereign government is toppled, the sovereignty of the country itself goes up in smoke. And I think, again, you'd probably understand that argument given Poland in World War II. But so I just don't understand how this is now irrelevant after you made the point that, well, it was a legitimate coup. Then you changed your answer and said, well, maybe it wasn't a legitimate coup.
There was no coup. Jackson, there was no coup. Yanukovych fled the country.
Impeachment, whatever you want to call it. So you're saying it was a legitimate impeachment. Then you said, well, maybe it wasn't legitimate, but it made sense and it was all fine because he had fled the country. So do you recognize that he didn't actually flee the country prior to this vote taking place, despite what
Russia invaded? Russia invaded on February 24th. There was a sniper massacre on February 20th. Clearly, Russia had coordinated its assault on Crimea and its invasion of Ukraine with the sniper massacre, with the way events were climaxing. There was a systematic plan by Russia in place to invade Ukraine, destabilize the country. The snipers were Russian. Yanukovych was behind the sniper massacre, and this was already a country whose sovereignty was being fouled and trodden over by Russia. Basically, Russia demanded that Yanukovych withdraw from the European Associate Agreement, and he was basically putting a veto on Ukrainian foreign policy. And when the protesters went out into the streets against that, then Yanukovych, under pressure by Putin, because we know that Putin was in constant communication with Yanukovych through the Euromaidan revolution. We know that Putin was encouraging Yanukovych to brutalize the protesters. He was encouraging Yanukovych always to escalate, carry out violence against the protesters. And Putin was the one who was encouraging Yanukovych to carry out a slaughter, a massacre. And when this did not work, then Russia had the plan to invade Ukraine, and they invaded Ukraine on February 24th, very, very, very much connected with the events on the Euromaidan. So this was always, from the very start, you accused the West of interfering in Ukrainian affairs and Ukrainian politics, it's Ukrainian sovereignty. Well, it was actually Russia who invaded at the start of 2014. Russia invaded because they wanted a veto on Ukrainian foreign policy, and when they weren't able to have a veto on Ukrainian foreign policy, and when they failed in pressuring Yanukovych, when they failed in pressuring their client Yanukovych to massacre protesters, Russia just straight out invaded. And so everything you accuse the West of when it comes to the Euromaidan so-called coup, everything you accuse the West of is actually right there in the actions of the Russian government, the attempt to abrogate Ukrainian sovereignty. If you're talking about a coup, I mean, Russia was pressuring the Ukrainian president to basically carry out an auto coup, in effect, create a dictatorship by carrying out acts of mass violence and slaughter. And so, if anything, it was Russia that was encouraging Yanukovych to carry out an auto coup d'etat, to seize power through the use of violence, carry out a massacre of the residents of the Euromaidan. And when this was not possible, Russia straight up invaded. So everything you accuse the West of doing with regards to Ukraine in 2014, the so-called foreign interference, et cetera, well, it was actually Russia that was guilty of all of that.
So, you want to lock, so I know that was a lot of talking, but you want to lock in your answer that Russian troops landed in Crimea prior to the impeachment taking place and prior to Yanukovych fleeing? That's your...
The Russian invasion began on February 24th.
So that's incorrect. It started on February 27th.
No, that's incorrect. Russia, the little green men began infiltrating the Crimean Peninsula on February 24th.
Okay. Well, even if it is February 24th, you said it was February 20th a moment ago. And
no, I said the sniper massacre took place on the 20th of February.
No, you said that they went into... I was actually shocked. I had to look it up because you said that the Russians went into Crimea on the 20th. I was shocked. I was like, well, maybe I'm wrong about something.
The sniper massacre began on the 20th and the Russians went in on the 24th.
Okay, so the Russians went in on the 24th. Okay, well, that lines up with what I understand to be the case. And that's actually true because the Ukrainian government had already illegally done this phony impeachment on Yanukovych and deposed him from power while he was still in the country. They did that on the 22nd is when they did it. They installed an interim president on February 22nd after they failed to impeach Yanukovych. So they actually illegally deposed him from power. He was still in Kharkov, and he was in Kharkov on the 23rd and Crimea on the 24th. So what you're saying is that after there was an illegal, illegal impeachment, as you put it, the Russians decided to go in. Yeah, that's your point?
I'm just saying, by the way, there was actually no precedent for the Ukrainian president fleeing the country and abandoning his duties. And so this was a completely unprecedented situation.
What are you reading from?
I'm not reading from anything. I've got my sources, my books that I've been consulting with.
So you are reading from something?
I'm not reading from something. I've got sources that I consult with because I'm not an idiot.
So
that makes up
what's your source on that?
I'm reading Timothy Snyder, many of his books, books on the Euromaidan, etc. You got a problem? What's wrong, Jackson? What's wrong? You've gone silent.
Make your point.
My point is Yanukovych fled the country. This was the constitutionally unprecedented situation. He fled the country. He fled the country to Russia. It doesn't matter. You were trying to claim this was a false impeachment. No, he fled the country. This is all immaterial, Jackson.
It was 3 days after the illegal impeachment took place.
He disappeared before that.
No, he was in Kharkov and he was in Crimea.
On according to Wikipedia, on February 22nd, Yanukovych could not be found. Parliament was not informed of his whereabouts.
And where was he on the 23rd, the day after the impeachment? He was in Kharkov, and then on the 25th...
There were unconfirmed media reports he had flown to Kharkiv.
He was in
Kharkov. Most of the ministers had disappeared, including Interior Minister Zakharchenko, who had reportedly fled to Belarus.
Okay. So he was in Kharkov. He was in Kharkov on the 23rd, and on the 25th,
unconfirmed media reports at the time.
So what's your confirmation otherwise? Where was he?
This is just, bogging down the debate.
Okay, yeah, we can move on. I feel like we hit this one. We really did some numbers on this one. So anyway, it's not an illegal coup if Yanukovych fled the country.
All right. Well,
true. I agree with that.
Before we
he just made his final point on this. We're going to move on. I'm going to make my final point on this just to summarize. February 22nd, the illegal impeachment took place. Yanukovych was deposed and there was an interim president installed. The next day, Yanukovych arrived in Kharkov. On the 25th, 3 days later, Yanukovych was in Crimea, and that's when the Russian troops began to appear after he was illegally deposed and once he was still in Ukraine. So glad we got that out of the air. And Drew can have his differences. So, Drew, what's your next point?
All right. Well, before we kick it back over to you, Drew, there,
yes,
I'm just going to remind everybody that we are doing a Q&A at the end of our debate here. So if you have questions for Drew or Jackson, I see you guys have quite a lot to say in there. So turn it into a super chat and we'll read it at the end of the show. With that point that Jackson just expressed there, we're going to kick it back over to Drew and let our open conversation continue going. And thanks again, Drew and Jackson, for being here to have this discussion. So back over to you, Drew.
So my point is, even in your narrative of the Euromaidan coup, blah, 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 how does that justify the Russian invasion in 2022, the attempt to depose an elected government, the attempt to destroy Ukrainian nationhood, the bombardment of Ukrainian cities, the terror that Ukrainians have suffered over the past year? How does that justify all the brutality that has taken place? You've got your lies and your propaganda narrative about the Euromaidan in 2014. And apparently in your worldview, the Ukrainian government ceases to, apparently in your worldview, Ukraine ceases to have sovereignty in 2014 because of your so-called narrative of the coup, even though Russia was encouraging Yanukovych to carry out an auto coup, basically slaughtering Ukrainian civilians so as to prop up his regime. Russia was encouraging Yanukovych to carry out an auto coup by slaughtering protesters. When this didn't work, when he couldn't kill enough protesters to keep himself in power, he fled to Russia. And Russia had these plans in place already. It's very obvious because they invaded within days of the sniper massacre. They begun illegally annexing Crimea. There was no justification for this. This is the illegal annexation of another sovereign nation's land. And I don't understand how, in any way, this can justify the murder, the atrocities that we have seen. We see Wagner, for example. Wagner.
Okay. Let's take it one at a time.
Let me say, I'm still going, Jackson. There are ex-Wagner fighters.
How long are we going to go?
Ex-Wagner fighters who have on video. They are saying
15 seconds, bud.
They are saying Prigozhin ordered us to slaughter Ukrainian civilians. We went into cellars and we slaughtered Ukrainian civilians. They talk about slaughtering 5- and 6-year-olds. So how can you justify this, Jackson? How can you justify the murder, the terror, the oppression?
I'm sure those interviews were 100% real.
Anyways,
yes, I'm sure. So your question is, how does Maidan relate to all of this? How does the coup relate to all of this, or illegal impeachment, as you put it? The way it relates to everything that's happening now is because when that illegal impeachment took place, you had people in the Donbas and people even in Odessa who were trying to speak out and essentially declare their autonomy. People in Donetsk and Lugansk and Crimea all did that. Crimea was the only region that was formally incorporated into the Russian Federation at that time. But Donetsk and Lugansk also took votes in which the overwhelming majority, I think it was like 85 to 97%, depending on the republic and the region of the republic, they voted to join or to become independent people's republics. Crimea voted with an 86% voter turnout. 97% of the people voted to join the Russian Federation. After this took place, the Kiev authorities that were installed in this, as you put it, illegal impeachment, began to wage a campaign of asymmetrical warfare against those civilians in the Donbass. 15,000 people were killed in the fighting, and Putin tried on multiple occasions to establish peace accords, the Minsk Accords, the Minsk II Accords, which were rejected. We now know they were not implemented by way of Western pressure. Angela Merkel, former chancellor of Germany at the time, admitted it as such just about 3 months ago. And then that's what happened. In the lead up to the Russian invasion, we saw a dramatic increase in Ukrainian shelling of the Donbas civilians. And that's what prompted the spark to try and protect the people in the Donbas. Putin wanted to protect the people in the Donbas, formally incorporate those regions to save the people there, and denazify and de-NATO-fy Ukraine overall.
Denazify, okay. Well, regarding your narrative of the spontaneous uprising of the peoples of the Donbas, etc., how do you square that with the reality, which is Igor Girkin, Strelkov, he himself says, After all, I pressed the launching trigger of war. If our squad did not cross the border at the end, all would have been finished, as in Kharkiv or Odessa, because Russia tried to foment rebellions in Kharkiv and Odessa, and they failed. And so Gherkin infiltrated with 50 men. They went to Sloviansk, and he says himself, practically the flywheel of war, which lasts until now, was launched by our squad, and I bear a personal responsibility for what is happening there. That is Igor Gherkin himself. And Igor Gherkin, a colonel in Russian military intelligence, he was employed by Malofeev, the Russian oligarch close to Putin, known as the Orthodox oligarch. Malofeev, quote, this is my own research. Quote, Malofeev, Ukraine is part of Russia. I can't consider the Ukrainian people as non-Russian. So Malofeev, working for Putin, infiltrates a squad of Russian militants into the Donbas. And just knowing Gherkin's history as well, Gherkin was someone who was present in Bosnia, fighting near Visegrad. Visegrad is where the Serbians carried out rape camps. This is where the Serbians carried out incredible atrocities, genocidal atrocities. They would lock hundreds of civilians in homes and burn them alive, incinerate them alive. They carried out rape camps. Gherkin was there. Gherkin was there at Visegrad fighting with the Serbs as a paramilitary operative. He was then in Chechnya. In Chechnya, he himself was responsible for numerous forced disappearances, murder of innocent people. This is an absolute brutal militant, someone who believes in basically the Russian imperial idea. He believes in going back to the Tsar. He was working for Malofeev, who again he believes in a Tsar of Russia. Malofeev is the one behind the Double-Headed Eagle Society, where they promote going back to a Tsar, etc., etc. This is the sort of ecosystem of fascists who were behind this. Dugan was basically saying we need a genocide of the Ukrainian Cretan. We need a genocide of the sewer dweller Ukrainians. This is what Dugan was saying at the time. And Gherkin and Dugan was employed by Malofeev as a propagandist. He was employed by Malofeev on Malofeev's TV stations. And so there was an ecosystem of Russian fascists working on behalf of Putin. And they were talking very openly about resurrecting the imperial idea, going back to imperial Russia. And Gherkin, someone who was present in Chechnya, disappearing citizens, present carrying out war crimes in Bosnia. Gherkin himself, he infiltrates Sloviansk, and he carries out this. He's the one who starts the war. He himself says that. He says, we were the ones who started the war. So how do you respond to that when you say, oh, it was a spontaneous demonstration, it was a spontaneous uprising?
Because 97% of the people voted to become independent there. So
and that's completely fake. No one believes in the fucking fake referendums.
So I provide a substantial counter to your rap.
There's no substantial counter. These are fake referenda. The Russian troops would go around and give people the ballot box. Do you really think they could vote against it?
All right. So before we kick it back over to Jackson with his objections to your statement there, I'm just going to remind everybody that we did have a poll in our live chat here at Modern Day Debate. So if everybody wants to go in there and do a vote on the discussion that we're having here, we are going to be doing our Q&A at the end here. I'm not seeing a whole lot of QA in there right yet in our Modern Day Debate chat. So if you have a question for either of our speakers, definitely get it into our live chat so we can keep our conversation going and maybe address some of the points that you might feel like our speakers may not have gotten to. So without further ado, we'll get it back over to you, Jackson, in your objection to Drew's statement there.
You asked, well, how do you think they could have voted against that? Hundreds of thousands of people did vote against it.
No, you're claiming that it's 97%.
But do you know how many people voted?
My God, man. Like, the Donbas has been depopulated after years of war. You've even got, the military figures of the Donbas saying there are no men between the ages of 15 and 55.
No.
So you're claiming tens of millions of people voted in the Donbas, and it was 98% for Russia.
No, Drew, you're misunderstanding, I guess, then. I'm talking about the 2014 referendum when this was all happening.
There was no possibility for a free and fair vote when Russian.
Why did hundreds of thousands of people vote against it becoming independent?
There was no possibility for a free and fair vote on the status of Crimea when it was occupied by the Russian forces. And do you know? So
no. I'm talking about Donetsk and Lugansk.
I've got a very interesting. Let me tell you. This is the backdrop. This is the backdrop, right, to the referendum. I will school you a little bit, Jackson. I'll school you a little bit. So, do you know the name? I want to ask you this. I want to ask you this. Do you know the name Skripnik?
So how come you
Do
get
you
to
know
ask your-
Skripnik? Do you know
Listen,
Skripnik?
how come
Do you
you
know
get to ask
Skripnik?
your
And do you
questions?
know?
Drew, I'm gonna mute
Do you know the name
Yeah,
Why do you
Amitov?
get
well, let's
to
just
Do you know the name Reset Amitov, Jackson?
why do you get to ask your questions, but when I ask you a simple question directly
This is directly related to your point about the so-called.
and I don't
fair
interrupt
referendum.
you either. I don't interrupt
Okay,
you
Jackson.
either.
Jackson.
So
This is
I asked
directly in
you a
response.
simple question
let's let Jackson
about
speak.
the referendum of the independence of the regions that are now at the center of this war. And you said it was bogus. I said, why is it bogus? Because
I
it's
will
no
explain it
chance.
to you why it's bogus.
Well,
I
hold
will
on.
explain to you
Let's-
why it's bogus.
Let's all right.
Let me ask.
Let's play fair then. Jackson has this question for you there. Drew, let's give you a minute to answer that, and then Drew will let you ask your
Okay,
question to Jackson, and we'll get as deep as we can with that.
In response to your claim that this was a fair referendum, I would like to ask you: do you know the name Jackson Reset Amitov?
My question was not
Do you
answered.
know the name Reset Amitov? Just yes or no.
The moderator just asked
Yeah.
you to answer my question about the
Let's-
hundreds of thousands that voted against
Well,
it.
but I'm answering it by asking you about Reset Amitov. You can't answer that. Okay, I will tell you about
Can you
it.
tell our
Reset
audience there, Drew,
Amitov
about?
was a-
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Reset Amitov was a Crimean Tatar on the day that when Crimea was annexed, when the little green men began showing up outside the Crimean parliament, Reset Amitov went and he carried out a lone protest as one individual, a silent protest against the annexation. Do you know what happened? Gherkin's lieutenant Skripnik, he carried out a kidnapping in public, a public kidnapping.
Where is this?
In broad daylight. I've got the video and I can actually show you the video.
I'm saying what region?
This was in Crimea. So
not where we're talking
I'm just showing
about
you the
right now.
background of terror. I'm saying that this is the background of terror that occurred with reference to your bogus referendums. Reset
20
Amitov
seconds.
was abducted in broad daylight by Skripnik's men, who was in turn, someone who works very closely with Gherkin, all of them Russian military intelligence. Amitov was found a few weeks later, his eyes gouged out, tortured to death. Now, this was a Crimean Tatar, a man with a family, a man who carried out a lone protest in Crimea, and he was tortured to death by Russian military intelligence. You can actually see the video of him being pushed off the square, abducted in broad daylight by the Russian men. So this is the background of terror. I'm just explaining to you the background of terror that occurred in Crimea and the occupied areas of the Donbas. This is what was happening in the background when Russia was carrying out its fake referendum. So how the hell can we believe that these were real referendums and it really expresses the will of the people? How many people as well were fleeing the violence and not able to vote?
All right, let's get back to Jackson.
I could just as easily say, well, look at the massacre of the dozens of individuals in the Odessa massacre, where you saw Ukrainian nationalists and government figures present, and the fire. They were throwing Molotov cocktails into the Odessa Trade Union House when people were simply peacefully protesting with a stand and tables outside of the Odessa Trade Union House. Nationalists came in, forced them into the Trade Union House, and burned like 50 or 60 of them alive. Those who didn't burn alive jumped from the third floor of the building and died in doing so. So I could bring up that point, but to be honest, it doesn't have, I mean, it has something to do with it, but it doesn't have a whole lot to do directly with the events in Lugansk and Donetsk, which I was just talking about. And I asked you a question: why were the events in Donetsk and Lugansk illegitimate if hundreds of thousands of people voted against the independent nature of the referendum? And in addition to that, contrary to the events in Crimea, there was no Russian troops present in Donetsk or Lugansk.
No Russian troops present. This was an invasion from the very get-go. You can actually, I gave you Gherkin's quote where he said, if it wasn't for us, and if it wasn't for us infiltrating into Ukraine across the Russian border, there would be no war. That was Gherkin's quote himself. And I also gave you an example of a Ukrainian citizen who was tortured to death. He was found with his eyes gouged out.
In Crimea.
Yes, in Crimea, simply for holding a sign outside the Crimean parliament. You don't contest that happened. This is an example of the terror campaign that the Russian occupation authorities waged across all the occupied regions. And so given this terror campaign happened, there's no way we can say this is a fair and free vote.
So by that logic, then it's definitely not a fair and free vote. That's because 60 people were massacred in the Odessa Trade Union House. So you get what you're saying, right? You say just because one individual was allegedly killed in this brutal torture method, which, I can't say I'm
There were
familiar
many
with that.
people kidnapped across
No,
Crimea.
just let me finish.
Were...
I didn't, come on.
Yep.
Let me finish.
Well,
You claim that this one individual, this, Crimean Tatar was brutally tortured. If that happened, I'd have to say that's disgusting. But, at the end of the day, you also are making this argument while refusing to acknowledge the argument of the repression of the people in Donetsk and Lugansk, the violent massacres of people in Odessa. It's like this doesn't exist, and this one Crimean Tatar massacre exists in some sort of a vacuum for you.
There was no repression of the people of Luhansk and Donetsk.
Really? Why?
Yes,
okay, so why
really.
did 97% of them, like I asked you earlier, vote to become independent?
Answer, the vote was fake. Simple.
Why? What's your proof it was fake?
Because I've given you examples of Russian terror campaigns against the citizens of occupied areas.
So you gave me an example in Crimea,
and also votes in Russia are themselves not free and fair. So why would I trust anything that Russia says when it comes to fake referendums and elections?
Well, Russia didn't host the referendums in Donetsk and Lugansk. It was Donetsk and Lugansk independent authorities who did that.
There was no independent authorities. I gave you the example of Gherkin infiltrating on behalf of Malafeev, who in turn was working for Putin. And there are actually wiretaps showing direct communication between Gherkin, Malafeev.
I'm just going to tell you, the millions of people who voted in this referendum in 2014 in Donetsk and Lugansk to become independent people's republics, they probably have no idea who you're talking about, okay? They voted to become independent people's republics.
Gherkin was the military, the head of the defense ministry of the fake republic.
Okay, so how many people do you think could name the defense secretary of the United States of America that live in the United States?
Man, don't play dumb, Jackson. Everybody knows who Gherkin Strelkov is.
Do you know who the defense secretary? Do you know who the defense secretary of the United States is?
This is stupid semantics.
No, it's a good
You
point.
can pretend that Gherkin doesn't exist because Gherkin doesn't suit your narrative, because this is a clear case of someone who was infiltrating the Donbas on behalf of Putin. It is a clear example of the Russian military and Russian military intelligence
Who's the defense secretary of the United States?
This is stupid, Lloyd Austin.
Okay, good job. Good job. I don't know if you read that in your chat, but you couldn't answer the question to begin with. So
it's stupid, Jackson. Jackson, this is dumb. Everybody knows. You're trying to pretend nobody knows.
I asked you the question. You didn't know.
When Gherkin actually was the one who was. This is a clear example.
You didn't know the question. You had to look in your chat or something. You didn't know the question to begin with.
Lloyd Austin. I know him because he goes.
So you're saying that each and every of the millions of individuals that voted to become independent were somehow co-opted or privately pressured by this defense minister
Jackson.
to vote
in 1991.
Let's let Jackson finish his question, and then we'll kick it over to you, Drew.
It's just laughable. It's laughable to assume that millions of people within a span of like weeks were privately pressured to join the movement for an independent people's republics, when you also had hundreds of thousands vote against the measure. That is true. It's on Wikipedia, which I'm sure is one of your favorite sources. You had hundreds of thousands of people who voted against becoming independent people's republics. Now, the most interesting point of all is that even Russia, they said that they respected the outcome of the referendum, but they would not actually recognize the regions as independent people's republics back in 2014. They waited until 2022, after 8 years of violence, when 15,000 people had died in the fighting, to actually recognize them because of the geopolitically sensitive nature of doing so. So your earlier question was, how does all this stuff relate? Well, you had Maidan, you had a coup, you had people try to rise up. When they rose up, you had 15,000 people slaughtered, and that wasn't going to be ending anytime soon because the West failed to make good on their promises of the Minsk Accords, which were peace proposals that would have brought an end to all of this before the war even began. And Angela Merkel admitted it as such.
With regards to the Minsk Accords, Minsk was sham. It was basically designed to achieve what Russia wanted in the first place, which was the dismemberment of Ukraine. Because if Minsk had been carried out, it would have basically bastardized and destroyed the Ukrainian constitutional order, because it basically would have allowed each region to have a veto on and conduct its own foreign policy. This is obviously, you can't have a country and basically have no central authority. This would have basically dismembered Ukraine. And so it's fake in that sense. But also there is no way, Jackson, that you can actually independently verify the results of the so-called 2014 referendum in the Donbas. There is just absolutely no evidence whatsoever. You can say all you like that millions of people voted. There is no evidence for that. There's no independent verification of the voting results. Russia routinely carries out sham elections inside Russia itself. Why would I trust anything that they've done? It wasn't independent authorities. I gave you the example of Gherkin, who infiltrated the Donbas. He's the one who started the war in the Donbas. Everybody knows it. He himself says it. And he was working on behalf of Russian military intelligence at the time. He was working for the oligarch Malafeev. And Malafeev was constantly in communication with Putin. And there are wiretaps showing Gherkin speaking to Malafeev all the time. And they were coordinating things very closely. This was fake from the get-go. And it was Russian military intelligence that was behind the annexation of Crimea. It was in Russian government invasion of the Crimea. Look at what happened when Gherkin infiltrated Slovyansk with just 50 men. They couldn't hold the city. They abandoned the city. And there were other Russian separatists who were calling for Gherkin's head for abandoning the city because they couldn't hold it. So they couldn't hold the city, and that's when the Russian invasion of the Donbas began, because these infiltration squads couldn't fight the Ukrainian military on their own. And so very soon it became a full-on warfare where Russian military was intimately involved in the Donbas. The Russian military was part of the war from the
I just want to bring, you've talked long enough. I want to bring up a point, because you keep saying, I mean, you can make one argument here, but you're making a false argument. You're making the argument that that this guy was in some way, shape, or form representing Russia's military, but he was not the Russian Minister of Defense. He was not a Russian military commander. He was the Minister of Defense of an independent People's Republic that hadn't even been established yet, meaning he was one of the Donbas civilians by default that was
Donbas
fighting.
Civilians? Are you fucking kidding? Gherkin's a Donbas civilian.
I let you talk for so long. This is a very, very rude
It's funny, though. It's fucking funny.
So, well, yeah, you claim that
Gherkin's a Donbas civilian. Holy fuck.
Let me talk.
Let's let Jackson speak. We'll give you a minute there, Jackson, to talk.
Yeah, well, he keeps claiming that this is some Russian representative or someone who's infiltrated from the Russian government or something to that effect. Yeah, you can call him a Russian nationalist. Yeah, you can call him a self-described freedom fighter. You can call him a Minister of Defense of a region that hadn't even formally recognized itself yet. But I mean, he was not a representative of the Russian military. There are some kernels of truth that Russia did provide some heavy artillery to the Donbas militias between later on, 6 years after the fighting broke out. But he himself was not a representative of the Russian military. He was just like a Russian nationalist who went to fight abroad, and he did not represent in any way, shape, or form the Russian government, the Russian military, and he in no way, shape, or form was a part of the Russian military command structure with the Ministry of Defense.
He was working for Russian military intelligence. He was a colonel in the Russian military intelligence. Gherkin has a long history. He himself admitted.
What year?
He was with the Russian military intelligence for 20 plus years. And
what year?
Putin himself says there is no such thing as a retired military intelligence officer.
What
in
year?
Russia.
What year?
I just gave you. I just told you.
What
Jackson.
Year?
Putin himself says there's no such thing as a retired Russian military operative.
You're not giving the year.
There's no such thing as a retired intelligence operative in Russia, and Gherkin was part of Russian intelligence for decades.
So you're not giving the year because he hadn't been a part of the FSB since 2003. That's why you're not giving me the year. Right now.
That is such a no. That's fake. That's fake. So you just had someone in your chat tell you Gherkin wasn't part of it since 2003. That's fucking fake. Putin himself said, quote, there is no such thing as a retired intelligence officer in Russia. That's Putin's quote. There's no such thing
except for the
retired.
fact that he did retire in 2003.
But Putin himself says there's no such thing as a retired officer, because for all intents, for example, when Putin came to power, he had officially retired from the KGB, etc. But you go back through the records, he never actually even, there's no record of his official retirement. If you go back through the records, he was still working for intelligence when he was working for the mayor of St. Petersburg. Putin was part of the intelligence apparatus, right up until he became president. As he himself says, there's no such thing as retired intelligence operative in Russia.
Okay, but you're claiming that he's a representative of the Ministry of Defense, which is different than just saying like ex-KGB. Putin didn't say there's no such thing as retired ministers of defense. He said there's no such thing as, if you're going to take that line of argument, which I would
ministers
argue
of defense.
on.
Wait, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Are you talking about the
claimed that he's part of the Ministry of Defense of the
Yes, he was recalled to Russia. He was recalled to Russia after the shoot down of MH17, because he actually posted on the day that MH17 was shot down, he posted, "We told you not to fly in our sky." And then because of the fucking catastrophe of the shoot down of MH17, he was recalled to Russia.
So he was a Russian nationalist that went rogue as a factionalist.
Hold on there, Drew.
No.
And
they were wiretapped.
Drew, I was going to say, I'm so sorry. We do love the enthusiasm there, but this has been a great conversation. But we do have to try to mitigate how much we're cutting off each other. So we're going to let Jackson continue on before we forget what we're talking about.
Okay.
Thank you. So, this is I actually personally wish Putin would have intervened officially much earlier than he did. I think they waited way too long, but to launch this special military operation into the former Ukraine, they waited way too long. And even
into
Putin
the former Ukraine.
Okay, can we stop with they just asked you not to interrupt.
It's insane what you're saying, man. You're saying I wish the invasion and torture and rape of civilians had occurred earlier.
Let's give. All right, we're gonna give Jackson 1 minute there.
Go on, Jackson. Go on.
We're gonna give him 1
go
minute
on with
there
the
to wrap up
self-incriminating material.
His point there. But once again, we do love the enthusiasm, everybody. It's just that we do have to try to mitigate the interruptions here. So back over to you, Jackson.
If you spent half as much time in a gym that you spend blabbering on in this debate, you may have actually lost some weight by now. So
funny, Jackson.
This is a rogue
Russian mail order bride.
This is you're on mute. How's that, bitch?
You've got a Russian mail order bride, and you think because you've got a Russian mail order bride that you're some kind of special.
I'm sorry, Drew. If you take yourself off mute again, I'm going to have to prevent you from being able to do that. We have to be able to have the back and forth. So if you interrupt again, I'm going to have to make it so that we can't take ourselves off mute. And I don't want to do that to either of you guys. You seem like you're really polite and you're really both passionate about what you're talking about. But we do have to try to make sure that we're getting the back and forth so everybody's hearing both sides of the discussion. So we'll let Jackson speak here for 1 minute and we'll kick it back to you. And we'll try to keep that going as a back and forth cross-examination type dialogue where you guys have a lot to unpack there. Okay. So back over to you, Jackson, and then we'll kick it back to Drew.
Yeah. What I was saying was I wish Putin did this earlier, because when you have the complete sovereignty of a country being swept away from under its feet, and you had dozens of individuals being murdered, massacred all across the country in Novorossiya. And you also have what then became a bloody war that lasted 8 years. Yeah, I mean, Putin, 15,000 people died. Putin should have done this earlier. You got to unmute yourself.
All right, we'll get you off mute there.
Putin should have invaded, raped, tortured, killed Ukrainian civilians earlier and wiped out the sovereignty of Ukraine, destroyed the Ukrainian nation, destroyed the independence of the Ukrainian nation. Should have happened sooner, in your view.
Well, there's certain things we can't debate the veracity of on YouTube when you talk about certain subjects. So I'm gonna
all the atrocities. I've seen them.
Given I'll say this. Given the fact that there was a high-level Ukrainian official minister who was fired by the Zelensky government over her claims of a certain town that starts with the letter B and with the letter A.
That's a fucking lie. That's a fucking lie. Straight fucking lie.
She was.
Straight fucking lies.
What was she fired for?
You're trying to deny the Bucha massacre. I've talked to people who were in Bucha. I'm not
trying to deny. I'm not trying to deny anything. She made very specific claims about something very specific that happened, and she told that all to the press, and she was fired for that. I can't get into the details of that on YouTube or else my account's going to get yanked. But there's a very specific part of that story that she led with in the press. And the press actually responded. They wrote a joint letter to her saying, you know, we get that this is war, blah, 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 but let's try to keep things factual. And she was fired thereafter.
Fucking lies, straight fucking lies.
Anyways, yes, I do.
I talked to an Australian cameraman who was in Booker. He saw the fucking massacre. He saw the bodies.
I would never deny it. I would never deny it. I would never deny it. So,
but you're claiming that it was Ukraine, which is just fucking insane. You're trying to pretend that Ukraine slaughtered its own citizens. This is not true. It's a fucking lie. This is an area that was controlled by the Russians.
I definitely am not denying Bucha. I would never do that. Anyone who denies Bucha should have their entire YouTube channel permanently taken away and their livelihood stripped away. But we can talk about
blah blah blah. No one fucking cares, Jackson.
We can talk about the 15,000 people that were killed in the Donbas because the majority of those were civilians, and I don't think you'd argue with me on that.
Every single day, Russia is launching missile strikes on Kiev. Every single day, Russia is torturing Ukrainian civilians in occupied areas. There are torture chambers. They've found torture chambers for kids. We've had testimony of kids being raped by Russian forces. We've had testimony of women being raped by Russian forces, raped in cellars, raped in dens. We've had testimony of brutal atrocities. We saw Bucha. We saw all the massacres that have taken place.
What do you want me to say?
Every single place where the Russians are expelled, we find mass graves where the local civic leaders were basically exterminated. This is a genocide because it's very similar to, say, like the Katyn massacre, where they target all the intelligentsia, the cultural figures, the activists. They try and basically exterminate the leadership of the nation because they want to destroy Ukraine as a nation. So every single time you go Donbas, oh, blah, 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 Euromaidan, I'm surprised you haven't gone Victoria Nuland yet, blah, 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 blah. You can't actually justify the massacre of the Ukrainian civilians. You can't justify, even when Putin himself and all the top Russian propagandists, and Malafeev, for example, Malafeev, the guy who employed Gherkin, Malafeev, the guy who put Gherkin into Sloviansk and begun the war in the Donbas, Malafeev himself says there's no such thing as the Ukrainian nation. The Ukrainian nation cannot exist. So you can't justify a war of extermination and a war of imperial conquest on its own ground. So all you can do is trim around the edges and go, oh, blah, blah, blah. What was the exact date the impeachment took place? Blah, 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 blah. And try and, try and destroy the debate by bogging us down in small factual constitutional details and minutiae of 2014. You can't justify the massacres that are taking place right now in this very second, right now in Ukraine. Civilians are being terrorized every day by Russia. You can't justify that. And so you can only go and take the debate back to 2014 constantly. That's all you can do because you can't justify the war right now as it is taking place and the tactics carried out by the Russians, which are trying to make it a war of extermination.
I didn't know they had CNN down in Australia. And by the way, your characterization of the Russian SMO and their military operations.
The SMO. Call it a war, Jackson. Call it a war. You can't say that in Jackson. You couldn't say that in Russia because in Russia...
Interruptions. It's just interruption after interruption.
But if you were in Russia, you can't call it a war, can you?
Interruption after interruption.
You went on Solovyov, who calls for nuclear strikes on America. How do you fucking live with yourself as a traitor to your own country? For fuck? What? A Russian mail order bride? Do you share her with the oligarchs?
Let's kick it over to Jackson.
Is she just yours, or do you share her with the oligarchs?
Let's let him answer that
Drew,
question.
You're very lucky that you reside in Australia, nowhere within a several thousand-mile radius of me, because it wouldn't be good if you did.
I've said in the past,
stop with the
we're willing to do
interruptions,
the
or else
boxing
I'm
match,
gonna
but
mute
you don't want
I'll mute
to
you.
mess up your beautiful curls, blah, blah, blah.
I'll mute you.
Let's let Jackson finish up his point.
Or
there.
James, or I forget your name. Sorry, the moderator should mute
That's all
Mr.
right.
Pavlou. So the point was you were making that this is some campaign of extermination. Again,
and that's what it is.
All right, Drew, sorry. We're going to have to mute you if you keep interrupting. So let's let Jackson speak without interruption for his point here, please.
It almost sounds like what you're describing is exactly what the Australian military did in Iraq. But, this
I don't support Australian war crimes.
I'm sorry, Drew. Let's keep going, Jackson.
Thank you for muting. So even people like Colonel Douglas McGregor, who in no way is like a Russian toady, this guy was the senior advisor to Donald Trump's Pentagon. Donald Trump, who gave a lot of arms and a lot of money to Ukraine and claims Zelensky is a close friend of his and someone he respects dearly. Even Colonel Douglas McGregor says that the operations of Russia in Ukraine have actually been significant in terms of military history due to the fact that there's been a huge effort and a successful effort by the Russians to minimize civilian casualties. Now,
we have fucking eyes, Jackson. We can see the war crimes every day. They're fucking shooting people every day. We see the bodies. We see the missile strikes on civilian infrastructure. We've got eyes.
All right, let's.
You're right.
Let
me just finish my point. Then you can soy out again. So you're right. They're shooting every day. The Ukrainian air defenses are shooting their own apartment buildings every single day. You're right about that. So
shooting their own
wasn't done, Drew. Not done. So it may surprise you, but there's been far less civilians killed over the past year of what you're describing as the most intense extermination effort since, Hitler in World War II, than the amount of civilians who died over the fighting in the Donbas, the asymmetrical warfare led by Nazi banderites and the Ukrainian military before these regions were incorporated into the Russian Federation. Far less civilians killed over the past year than we saw in the Donbas.
Just in Mariupol, there were 50, 60, 70,000 dead. We don't know the full numbers. But we can see from satellite imagery the mass graves. We can see the mass graves.
15 more seconds.
We can see the mass graves. So you just lie constantly. Oh, this is the most humanitarian war in human history. We've got video evidence of Wagner fighters going. We were told by Prigozhin to shoot children in cellars, exterminate people in cellars. They wiped out full cellars of people. What about even just in Mariupol? They had hundreds of civilians hunkering down in the drama theater, and they wrote in Russian outside, children on the ground, and the Russian part still bombed it to the ground. Hundreds were killed, massacres every single day. And you try and say, this is a humanitarian war. How dare you? It's fucking sick. We all have eyes. We can see the Russian war crimes. I went to Ukraine. I met people who were coming from places like Mariupol. I met families who were coming from places like Mariupol. They had fucking 1,000-yard stairs. They had lost everything, and you laugh and you laugh and you laugh and you try and monetize the invasion. You monetize the invasion with like fucking murder. And you've got a Russian mail order bride that you share with oligarchs. It's fucking sick. You believe in nothing, Jackson. You believe in nothing. It's just you defend massacres. You defend massacres for fucking money.
So we are where we are at this point in the conversation. What we will do to try to get us back full circle here, and back to the substance of our conversation. We're going to put our speakers into a 2-minute closing, and then we're going to go into our Q&A, and that's going to probably spur on a little bit more discussion as we go through there. So everybody who's watching right now, if you're in the Modern Day Debate live chat, you can put in a question for either of our speakers, and we will continue the conversation going from there. So we'll kick it over. Who would like to do that? I'll ask, because we don't always do a traditional format here. Who would like to do their 2-minute closing first?
I'll let Fatty go.
All right, let's not.
No, Jackson, you go ahead. Please, Russian mail order bride, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Ladies first.
And let's try not.
No. You go ahead. The Russian mail order bride, man, you must go first.
Hold on. All right.
The man started first. I'll let ladies go first.
All right, hold on.
Please, Jackson, please.
I'm going.
The cuck who shares his girlfriend with Russian oligarchs, please go first.
All right, so to
I know
both of you,
you're fat and you're running out of breath.
I'm
running
out
of breath right now,
I'm
but
going
you
to mute
can
the two
go
of
first.
you. I'm going to mute
Jackson,
the two
please.
of you. If you
I know you're sad every day.
All right, so I'm going to ask the two of you to stop, because right now, if we just get into mudslinging, we're not going to get any substance. And when we boot these over to our podcast, all we're going to have is a bunch of mudslinging and you guys calling each other a bunch of names. That's not really useful. So I'm going to ask you guys to both be polite. We're going to move into 2-minute closings, and we're going to stick to the substance of our conversation. So, looking at our conversation, we'll follow the traditional format. So we don't get into this discussion again of trying to find an amicable way to find out who's going to close. Jackson, traditional, we're going to let you close it out, and we'll give it over to Drew. All right, you need to unmute yourself.
All right, beautiful. Let's wrap this portion up. So, anyways, the claim that 50,000 have died in Mariupol is laughable, and it's actually shameful that you'd claim something that insane. It's shameful to the people of Mariupol. It's shameful to the people of Russia. It's shameful to the people of Ukraine. It's shameful to your own family. It's shameful to your grandfather. It's shameful to your grandmother. It's shameful to your future children that are unborn if you ever find someone to procreate with, which I doubt is ever going to happen. But yeah, to wrap things up, Russia justified. I feel like I made my case. My opponent couldn't, list even basic dates of things he claimed took place in a certain chronological order. He didn't know the order of events of the coup in Ukraine in 2014. He didn't know that it was an illegal, unconstitutional coup, which he actually, he said it's an impeachment, whatever. He did grant me that point that it was at least an illegal impeachment. He didn't know the dates of the events that unfolded in relation to the Crimean referendum and when Russian troops arrived. He said it happened 5 days prior to it actually happening. Which is very important for the context of the situation. He didn't know how many people voted in Donetsk, Lugansk referendums, which is also important because he claims that there was no way for a free and fair referendum, even though hundreds of thousands of people voted against becoming independent people's republics. And I think I'll leave it at that because that pretty much summarizes my argument, which just won.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jackson, for being here and presenting your case. And we'll kick it over to Drew for his closing statements there for up to 2 minutes. And then we'll get into our Q&A. And just a reminder to be friendly in the live chat and to get your super chats in there. And we will keep the conversation going as long as we have questions for our speakers and they consent to be here. So over to you, Drew.
The cuck of the Russian oligarchs, the cuck of Jonah Hill, he talks about other people's families being ashamed of them. And yet Jonah Hill's cucked him and his own parents hate him. I mean, we've all seen Jackson's parents flaming him on Twitter. It's very sad. His own parents hate him. I mean, he could not in any way justify the ongoing massacres, torture, atrocities carried out by the Russian military every single day in Ukraine. He can't justify this on moral grounds. He has to try and pretend that these atrocities didn't happen. He has to try and pretend that this is somehow the most humanitarian war ever conducted. Even though we've all got eyes, we can see the Russian military launching missiles indiscriminately at Ukrainian cities. We saw the Russians for months boast about how they were going to starve and freeze Ukrainian cities into submission. We know that this is a war of extermination because in every single town that has been liberated, there have been mass graves. And the local civic leaders and activists have all been exterminated. Jackson tries to bring the debate back to 2014, blah, 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 his stupid narratives of 2014, the propaganda narratives that are basically all packaged from Oliver Stone's stupid documentary. But really, he didn't even know who Risat Amitov was. He didn't know that there were Crimean Tatars who were brutally tortured to death because they resisted the Russian annexation of Crimea. He didn't know about the brutal repression of Ukrainian civilians and citizens in regions that were occupied by Russia. He basically didn't know who Gherkin was. He didn't even know who started the operation in 2014. He didn't know who started the Russian invasion of 2014. He pretended that this was a spontaneous uprising when there is so much evidence that Gherkin, working for Malafeev, an oligarch that was very close to Putin, Gherkin, a former colonel in Russian military intelligence, someone who was basically always in Russian military intelligence. Putin himself says that there is no such thing as an ex-intelligence officer in Russia. Gherkin himself boasts about starting the war in 2014. This is someone who's a Russian military intelligence operative, someone who was working for Malafeev, working for Putin. There's all these wiretap conversations between Malafeev and Gherkin at the time, back in 2014. There's all these wiretap conversations between Malafeev going all the way back to the Putin. Malafeev was talking to Putin through the shared confessor that they share, which is Father Tikhon. They were constantly in communication with the Russian government, the Russian military. And Jackson can't defend the atrocities and the genocide that is taking place. He has to just try and pretend that it's not happening. He has no morals whatsoever. He tries to monetize the invasion with fucking Z swastika. And he gets cucked every single day by his Russian mail order bride girlfriend, who is probably shared around with many Russian oligarchs. And it's very sad. I can't believe that someone would sell out so much their own country, going on a program with a Russian propagandist who basically has called for nuclear strikes on the American homeland. He sells out his own country for a Russian mail order bride who is shared around with all the Russian oligarchs. It's fucking sad. His own parents hate him. Everybody hates Jackson. He has no beliefs whatsoever. This is someone who defends genocide, massacre, atrocity, the rape of children. He hangs out with Scott Ritter, known sexual offender and pedophile. He hangs out with Scott Ritter. So clearly Jackson has no morals whatsoever. He's willing to hang out with pedophiles, defend pedophile Russian troops, defend rapist Russian troops, defend genocidal Russian troops, all for money, and a Russian mail order bride who cucks him every day with Russian oligarchs. It's very sad. I have never known an existence more subhuman than Jackson's.
All right. So let's move into our Q&A from there, everybody. Thank you so much, Drew and Jackson, for being here. I know it's been a little spicier for this conversation here, but we don't mind that. Just a reminder in our live chat that, you know, if you got something spicy to say, try to keep it related to the topic so that we can have something substantive towards is Russia's war on Ukraine justified? So let us keep going with our super chats and keep them coming in because our speakers, I'm sure, will have all kinds of thoughts about these super chats, especially this first one. I mean, you're going to have all kinds of thoughts about this. This is from Otter for $5. He said, nice moderating mod. Really being non-biased. Oh, that's not the first one. $5. This was the one I wanted to read here because it was about the moderator, which is why I'm being ironic because obviously you guys don't care about that. It says moderator is handsome, but still inferior to our Lord and Savior. Giga chat in the flesh, James Coons. James, if you're out there watching, the live chat loves you just as much as they always have. You know, I wish they loved me as much as they did you, but you know, we can't always just get there from A to D right from day one. So I'm doing what I can, everybody. But yeah, James is a hell of a guy. So thanks for that shout out there. Bubblegum Gun, thanks for being back in the super chats there. $2. Drew, was the U.S. justified to remove nukes from Cuba?
I'm not defending American military operations. I'm not defending that. With regards to Cuba, I mean, that has nothing to do with Ukraine. There are no American weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine. That's a complete lie. That's part of the insane Russian propaganda narrative. I know they like to claim that there are biolabs or stupid things like that. It's really insane, you know, targeting Russian DNA, crazy shit like that. If anything, poor Ukraine, because Ukraine had weapons of mass destruction, nuclear devices on its territory, and it decided to voluntarily give them up in the Budapest Memorandum, where they asked China, Russia, they asked multiple countries, basically. They asked America as well to guarantee the sovereignty of Ukraine. And very sad that they gave up that deterrence, because as soon as they gave up the nuclear weapons, I know that they didn't have the launch codes, but they still had them on that territory. When they gave up the nuclear weapons, that's when Russia began to nibble away at Ukraine and try and force it to be an enslaved country and try to rape and torture Ukrainian civilians. It's really sad that Ukraine gave up its weapons of mass destruction because, you know, that was a deterrent effect potentially.
Any thoughts on that one, Jackson, or do you want to move on?
Well, that argument would make sense if they were Ukraine's nukes, as he put it, but you know, they weren't Ukraine's nukes. And Fatty over here is claiming that, oh, you know, Ukraine gave up their own nukes. No, they weren't Ukraine's nukes. They were the Soviet Union's nukes. And I mean, the thought that they would give up Ukraine and then say like, oh, you know, we're
give up
have...
Ukraine voted for independence, Jackson. Every region, even Crimea, voted for independence. Even the Donbas, 90% for Ukrainian independence. This is what the people of Ukraine wanted. They did not want to be part of the Soviet Union. They did not want to be part of Russia.
Lenin's biggest mistake was giving up Ukraine. And also, I find it funny that you care. Well, no, true.
Ukraine existed prior to Lenin. Ukraine existed prior to Lenin. Lenin had to create the Ukrainian SSSR because he knew that there was no way that the Bolsheviks could have ever reconquered Ukraine if there was no Ukraine SSR.
Badass.
Jackson, cuck of the Russian oligarchs.
No, all right, we're not going to be doing any mudslinging and anything like that. So we're going to let Jackson continue on his point. The speaker that you're talking to, his name is Drew, so we're not going to refer to anybody by any other name. Jackson, I'm going to let you finish up what you're saying there, and then we'll let Drew close off the conversation there. Okay.
So Fatty gets to talk about
No,
my
we're going to
woman
call
in
Drew.
my
Drew, I don't want to kick you out of the Zoom call, so we're going to refer to our speaker as Drew. He came out here to talk to you, so we're going to have some respect. Let's refer to the conversation if we can. So
he gets to talk about my family. He gets to talk
He
about
called me fat first. I only
we
went there.
won't do who
personally.
did what first.
He gets to talk about my family, my
We're not going to do
woman.
that. We're not going to do that either.
Your
No,
woman,
but he's been
the
doing
Russian
it.
mail order bride shared with the oligarchs.
We shouldn't.
Fatty,
No, we're not going
Fatty,
to allow that either. So
Fatty,
let's continue.
Please, Jackson,
Listen.
please, Jackson.
Listen, I know you're jealous that I have a beautiful girlfriend, Miss Universe Russia. I know you're jealous because you'll never have a woman touch you for the rest of your life, so long as you remain as fat as you currently are. But there's no reason to do this mudslinging, okay? So anyways, those were the Soviet
Jackson, how many
Union's-
times has she slept with Russian oligarchs while you've been together?
Let's not. Let us.
When was
finish
the
up
last
his
time
question.
you slept with someone, Fatty? So
Last night. Last night,
So,
fucking cunt, retard.
well, given that everyone knows you lied throughout this entire debate, we all know you're lying about that too. So those were the Soviet Union's nukes, and they weren't Ukraine's nukes. That's all I got to say.
All right, Drew, we'll let you close that off.
Look, Ukraine voted for its independence. 90% of Ukraine voted for independence. Even the Donbas, 90% independence. Crimea, 57% independence. Ukraine wanted to be free of Russia, wanted to be free of the Soviet Union. Ukraine existed as an independent entity prior to Lenin. That's such a stupid propaganda point by the Russian propagandists claiming that Lenin created Ukraine. Ukraine existed prior to
I
Lenin.
didn't say that,
Lenin was making a
Fat-ass.
concession to
I'm
the
going to warn you once
Europeans.
more, Jackson. If you refer to
but
Drew as anything other than Drew, we are going to have to remove you from the chat. So I'm just being
very
fair.
stupid.
So let's try to be respectful to one another. If any of you have complaints that are a little less obvious to me, you can let me know. But let us try to continue on with the conversation. So I'll let you finish up there, Drew.
And look, Ukraine voluntarily gave up weapons of mass destruction on its territory, gave up nuclear weapons on its territory. That's what Ukraine gave up in return for security guarantees by Russia, the UK, and the US. And unfortunately, that was an agreement that was not worth the ink it was signed on paper, because Russia immediately proceeded to invade. And Jackson, is very immature. Your depiction of me as Jabba the Hutt, very immature. I just have to say, you've focused on, the issues of physical bodies, etc. It's very interesting how obsessed you are with my physical body.
Yeah, it is interesting that you
but
brought up
I just have to say, I mean,
over and over
I'm
and
not
over
interested
again.
in
You kept
you.
bringing up my woman. I don't really understand why you're
your
doing
woman.
that.
I don't know, man.
Because
I don't know
if we're
if it's
having
yours.
a conversation
I don't know
about
if you
the
have her,
substance
because
of geopolitics.
it's
why
well
you gotta
known
bring
that a
up
lot of
man's
these Russian
woman?
mail order
will-
Why you
brides,
gotta bring up a
move on.
man's woman? I know you've never had a woman, so you're interested in the idea
Look,
of what a woman
I know that
feels like.
I know
It's
that
like to talk
it's sadly
to a
the
woman.
case that a lot of these Russian women are sexually trafficked by oligarchs and stuff like that. And I just hope she's safe, and I hope you're not fucking abusing her.
You know what's interesting? Ukraine is actually the home of child sex trafficking in all of Europe. So it's interesting.
Russia. You think Russia's a trad society? It's got the highest abortion rate in the world. It's got the highest massive HIV rates. Very low rate of church attendance. You claim that Russia's this trad society. Russia has
low rate of church attendance compared
I don't know.
to what?
Maybe you're going to move to Russia so you can
compared
bash your
to
woman. Very sad.
Afghanistan? Compared to what?
All right, let's continue
Russia,
on from there.
I don't know if you're going to. Do you like the fact that Putin decriminalized wife beating? Is that why you're interested in having a Russian girlfriend?
Let us continue on because we.
Do you believe in that? I don't know.
I do not want to disrespect the live chat here and what our questioner had asked there. So we've moved a little bit off the topic here, and like I said, we want to try to keep it substantive. So George D for $5 asked, Drew, independent journalist, reported and videos on YouTube available still, and international observers were present in the referendum. So how they not legit? That's for you, Drew.
No, there is no independent verification of the referendums, the fake referendums. As I've already stated, there was a campaign of mass terror and fear and repression carried out against Ukrainian civilians under Russian occupied areas. There were dozens of people kidnapped, people were killed. And so I think there's no way you can say that this was a free and fair vote. Absolutely no. There's no way, because people were being killed in Russian occupied areas simply for being Ukrainian.
All right.
Simply for advocating for, you know, continued for the continued existence of the Ukrainian nation.
All right. Thank you.
This guy's going to tell you that like Australia is a real country next, or that Taiwan's a real country, or like
Taiwan is a real country, Jackson, and Australia is a real country.
He's going to be like, Canada's a real country. Oh my God.
Jackson,
Canada.
Jackson, you
Australia,
unfortunately, you have burger brain. Unfortunately, you have the brain of the American exceptionalist. No matter how many times you denounce your own country,
let's
you have the
give
brain of an
Jackson,
American exceptionalist.
where this question was for you, Drew, we'll give
my time to respond.
We're going to give the floor to Jackson here for 20 minutes, 20
Okay.
seconds here, and then we're going to go to the next question.
20 seconds, I can end Drew's debate. Drew.
All right. So you had something to say there? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I want him to pay attention to this. If something unfortunate that I would never wish to happen, if something like the United States nuking Australia into the ocean, or if Australia just hypothetically fell into the ocean, would anyone ever notice?
Jackson, you are.
No, the answer is no.
You are a
no one would
hardcore
notice.
imperialist. You believe
if
in the
Australia
genocide.
fell
You
into
believe
the
in the
ocean.
genocide and subjugation of countries
No one
of the
would
global
notice.
South, such as Australia. I'm actually the one who's
can't
fighting
even answer the
For
question.
the sake
in
of the
global South.
conversation, I mean, I can ask. I mean, you don't have to, but if you could just answer his question, Drew, just for the sake of the conversation, and then we'll just continue on.
Yeah, my answer is Jackson is a unabashed genocidal imperialist. He believes in imperialism and genocide.
Can't answer the question.
He wants the global South to be forever enslaved.
Cannot answer the question.
And that's why I'm fighting for
Australia would sink in the ocean and no one would notice.
The global South as well. Jackson unfortunately believes in the genocide and repression and slavery of other nations, so that Americans continue to feed themselves with burgers as the world burns.
Can't answer the question.
What Jackson wants.
Well, that would be his answer. So whether you feel he answered the question or not, we're going to move on from here, just because we have quite a few Q&As here, and I feel like we're going to keep getting down into these discussion rabbit holes, which is fine. That's kind of what we're here for. So $4.99 from Otter. Jackson, who is responsible for the downing of MH17? How did the LPR and DPR get funded to receive weapons?
Irrelevant, nothing burger question. That's my answer.
How? 38 Australians were killed. Hundreds of civilians were killed. Gherkin admitted it was him.
Australia is not a real country.
Oh, very funny, man. Very funny. You believe in genocide and imperialism. You've got a fucking miserable existence. You're basically subhuman because you believe
let's not talk about
full of war, imperialism, death, genocide.
Let's not talk about our other speakers. Let's continue on, please. So, Drew, George D for $5. Why are you spreading rumors that Ozzy Kozak took his life when you and me know he's been given asylum at the Australian-Russian consulate?
I've never said that Simeon Boykov took his own life. I know right now he's hiding in the Russian consulate because he tried to assault a Australian elderly man. He tried to push someone down the stairs. This guy's a thug, and he's hiding in the Russian consulate of Sydney because he's a coward, and he's a complete coward. So he's hiding in the Russian consulate of Sydney. I've never said that he committed suicide. That's crazy. But if Simeon wants to denazify himself, go ahead.
All right, let's continue on. And I do apologize, Otter, if I missed some of the mudslinging there earlier while I was going through the live chat. I do apologize. I do try to keep it to a minimum, so I'm sorry if either speaker you feel like I didn't rein somebody in, because I know you guys have been being a bit juicy with each other. So if I missed anything, I'm sorry. I'm doing my best to be fair and also keep an eye on the live chat. So just know that I'm in everybody's corner when it comes to keeping the conversation going and making sure that things are remaining amicable. So that would be my response to you, Otter, and Little Miss Betty Page. I'll try to do better in the future as I go. So Otter for $5. Name one time in a democracy where 97% of people agree on anything at all. That's for both of you, I'd say.
Well, it doesn't really matter if it's a democracy. It matters if it happened or not. I mean, if you ask 100% of the people by the end of World War II in Nazi Germany whether or not they like Hitler, I think you'd have the vast majority of people, maybe not that number, but a lot of people probably say, civilians who vote would say, yeah, no, we don't like this guy and we want someone else. So, yeah, I think that's an acceptable point you could find in the argument. Yeah. And I think that the coup government that was backed by the West is a comparable force they're definitely the ideological inheritors of Hitler and Bandera. And also the last point I'd bring up is it wasn't all of Ukraine that voted. It was specifically two regions of the Donbas. It was Donetsk and Lugansk. It wasn't even, like, from what I understand, it wasn't even Zaporozhye or all of Kharkov. It was just Donetsk and Lugansk. So that would be like asking the question, I guess, to the state of Florida, Florida residents, would you rather have Joe Biden or Ron DeSantis as your governor? Obviously, you're going to have the vast majority of people choose Ron DeSantis, their current governor. So it's just, in certain regions, you have like ethnic enclaves. There you have Russian ethnic enclaves, and they supported becoming independent because they didn't profess to support the coup rule that was backed by the West.
The same regions that had 90% vote for independence at the referendum when Ukraine was voting for its independence, the same regions. And, you know, there was absolutely no way that there was any free or fair vote in Russian occupied regions, because Russia has never held free and fair votes. Russia's dictatorship, they invaded Ukraine by force, and then they held sham referendum. And people who tried to, you know, oppose the invasion, people who protested on behalf of the Ukrainian nation in these Russian occupied areas, they were tortured and killed. So Jackson's a liar. Simple as.
All right. Well, since you directed that directly at Jackson, we'll give Jackson another 20 seconds to espouse on that if he'd like.
The elections were clear. Hundreds of thousands of people voted against becoming independent, but the vast majority, millions, voted to become independent. And that's why they fought for their independence for 8 years. And in 2022, they again had another vote in these regions, Zaporozhye, Kherson, Donetsk, Lugansk, and voted to join the Russian Federation this time. And that's why they are now part of Russia, and Ukraine's map is again forever changed.
All right. Let's continue on from there, where that was for the two of you. And
I've got a question for Jackson. Does
Sure.
Jackson believe in an independent Ukraine?
Depends, I guess, on the era you are talking about and what Ukraine is.
Do you think Ukraine is its own separate nation to Russia?
You could make an argument that portions of it are.
Portions of it.
Yeah, I think that there's probably an acceptable argument that you know, portions of Ukraine could stand today as its own state. I think you're going to have pushback, of course, from Russia and Novorossiya. You're going to have pushback, probably. Yeah, you're going to have pushback pretty soon.
The fake Russian region.
You're going to have pushback pretty soon, I think, maybe even by Poland and Hungary on the borders of Ukraine. So
no, that's insane. That's stupid Russian propaganda. Poland has been the biggest supporter of Ukraine during the war, and it's
Why?
Just stupidity. It's idiocy. I mean, you don't believe in Ukrainian independence. You think
let's hold on,
that
Drew.
Ukraine...
You asked him a question there. Actually, I think you asked him a couple questions.
Yeah.
So we'll let Jackson ask you what he's asking there, and then we'll try to continue on. So you had asked him why.
I don't profess to know what the Polish authorities are going to do, but based on everything that's happening, I mean, why else is Poland expending so much on sending so many men into Ukraine? Why is the Polish government coming out? Why is Duda coming out and saying that in the future we're going to have a common history, we're going to have a common border, or we're going to dissolve our border?
Because Russia enslaved Poland for
finish.
decades. Russia enslaved Poland for decades, so they don't want to go back to slavery.
Well, I was going to say,
let me just finish.
Yeah.
Why is Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban coming out and saying that the EU and the United States are trying to create a new power structure in a joint Poland-Ukraine after the war?
Orban's a liar. Orban's a liar.
Let's let him ask his question. I know he's taking a little bit, but that's all right.
I don't profess to know the answer if Poland is going to move in on Ukraine. But the question was, do you think there's
Fucking
a Ukraine
fantasy.
state?
Let's ask his question.
I think that you could say that Kiev is just as much Ukrainian as it is Mongol.
Fucking projection on your part. I mean, if anything, Russia spent centuries under under the Mongols. Kiev didn't.
All right, let's continue on there because we do have other questions related to all of this. And if anybody has any other anything else they want to pop into the super chats there, we will keep going as long as we have super chats and as long as our speakers are good to continue on. If any of our speakers, though, do need to take a break, go get some water or, go relieve yourself, that's fine. So speak now or forever hold your pee. Yeah? All right. That's on you, boys. All right, let's continue on. To Drew from My Name is Jeffrey, $5. What is your response to Amnesty International report in 2014 that conceded that Ukraine ultranationalists were shelling civs Donbas indiscriminately?
Unfortunately, Amnesty has laundered a lot of Russian propaganda when it comes to Ukraine. We saw that last year, for example, when Russia invaded. Amnesty laundered Russian propaganda, claiming that Ukraine was targeting civilians because its soldiers were based near civilians, as though Amnesty wanted the Ukrainian soldiers to sleep out in the open so that they could be murdered and killed. I mean, Amnesty has shown itself to be complete stooges when it comes to the Ukraine war, and I don't believe anything Amnesty says when it comes to claims against Ukraine. It's very unfortunate that Amnesty destroyed its reputation with regards to Russia. They're still good on some things like China and stuff, but overall there are big problems with Amnesty as an organization because Amnesty unfortunately laundered a lot of Russian propaganda in Ukraine.
I don't have much to say. The Amnesty International report, if anything, greatly underreported the civilian casualties that took place at the behest of the Ukrainian military. It was a good report. So let me just finish. It was a good report in a lot of ways. They exposed the fact that the Ukrainian military routinely use civilians as human shields. That was the main takeaway from the report, actually, that the Ukrainian military routinely was using civilians as human shields and using them as hostages. So, the Ukrainian military, while it is one of the top fighting forces in the world right now, it's second best in all of Europe, no doubt. It is a gruesome band of terrorists and Nazis and war criminals.
All right. Any thoughts on that, Drew, or do you want to continue on with the Q&A?
Which lie does Jackson want me to address in particular? Which one of his own lies?
That's a bit of a loaded question, so we'll continue on with the Q&A if you didn't have anything specific you want to
I mean, look, with regards to Amnesty, they had an independent inquiry into the report in question that you're mentioning right now, Jackson, and 8 independent experts verified that the report was wrong, and they stuffed up big time when it came to Ukraine, accusing Ukraine. Amnesty's actually apologized internationally for that horrible report. And thankfully, people are starting to see the truth. I mean, we've all got our own eyes and ears, and we can actually watch the videos. This is the most televised conflict in history, and we can see every single day the war crimes being perpetrated by Russian forces, war crimes that you deny either exist or, sticking your head in the sand like an ostrich, or alternatively, you defend them. And I think you defend, the slaughter of civilians. It's very sad. I mean, how can somebody be so inhumane defending the slaughter of civilians?
Yeah, I'm going to respond to that. I definitely don't support the slaughter of civilians. That's why I support the Russian SMO.
But the Russians are continually slaughtering Ukrainian civilians.
Ukrainians are. Amnesty International proved that.
That's a complete lie. Amnesty's actually apologized for that stupid report.
They apologized for it, and they did take the report down, but they never said any of it was wrong. The only reason why they apologized was because
eight independent experts
the only reason why they apologized was because soy boys like yourself got all up into a titty when the truth came out from a Western respected source.
No. The truth came out when Amnesty apologized, and they had 8 independent experts verify that report was wrong. And every single day, we're seeing massive slaughter by the Russian military against civilians. We're seeing indiscriminate missile attacks on Ukrainian civilians. And also, Putin and the Russian military and Solovyov and stuff, they talk about, starving the Ukrainians into submission during the winter.
Who are
they
the 8 independent experts?
Freezing the Ukrainians into submission in the winter. They were supporting genocide. And you think it's a humanitarian operation. Jackson,
Who are the
fundamentally
8 independent
support the
experts?
slaughter of Ukrainian civilians. Fundamentally, you believe in the death and the murder of your political opponents.
Who are the 8 independent experts?
There were 8 independent experts who verified the Amnesty report was wrong.
Who?
Go up, Google it yourself.
I'm an independent expert, and I say that it was right.
No, you're not an expert. Jackson, you're
Yes,
not an
I am.
expert.
I'm an independent
Based on
expert.
fucking what?
Based on me saying I'm an independent expert.
Okay, I'm an independent expert.
Okay, cool.
You're a fucking liar. As an expert, I say you're a fucking propagandist and liar.
I say you're a propagandist and liar.
Oh my! Well, we're
This is
getting
not a
we're getting back to our
Russian
juice again, there, everybody. So these guys are
How the
shy.
fuck did you go on Solovyov? How did you actually live with yourself? This guy supports nuclear strikes on Kiev.
How do you live in your own skin each and every day?
Let's
Jackson, you have no morals whatsoever. You have no soul. You'll probably burn in hell for all
This
eternity.
is not related to is Russia's
You're
war on
essentially a
Ukraine
demon.
justified. So let us stop. Like I said, I don't want to go back into mutes at this point.
How do you sleep
kind
at
of
night? I
winding
just
down.
don't know.
We're winding down as far as like the Q&A. I mean, if you guys want to keep having the Q&A come in, that's great. But if you guys keep interrupting me, we'll have to cut this a little bit shorter. So let's just try to keep that to a minimum, and we'll continue on with the super chats here because we got lots of them, and I think there's room for lots of more discussion here. We just, like I said, we want to try to keep away from the mudslinging just because it takes us off point, which is not entirely useful to the overall discussion. So, Counselor Guy for $5. Supposed defensive alliance involved in Libya and Syria. Russia has every right to not want NATO at their front door. NATO is an agent of chaos. I'll let you guys both expound on that, starting with you, Drew.
Russia would not have countries in Eastern Europe begging to join NATO if Russia hadn't spent centuries trying to subjugate and enslave the nations of Eastern Europe. So given Poland doesn't want to be enslaved to Russia, given the Baltic states don't want to be enslaved to Russia, I can understand why they wanted to join NATO. I wouldn't want to be enslaved by Russia either. I mean, this is a country that 1/5 of its own population doesn't even have sewage, doesn't even have indoor plumbing. This is sadly a very dysfunctional country that has been raped and pillaged by the oligarch class. Russia is a very tremendously naturally wealthy country, but it has been raped and pillaged by the elite for decades. The elite that Jackson supports. It's sad. I mean, if Jackson really believed in supporting Russia, maybe he'd support the Russian people against the corruption of the Russian elite. Maybe he'd support more than one. Maybe he would try and maybe Jackson would feel kind of some kind of sympathy for the 1/5 of the Russian people who don't even have indoor plumbing. They don't even have indoor plumbing in one of the naturally wealthiest countries on earth. And this is because it's been raped and pillaged by the elites for decades. And, Jackson loves to, as a sycophant and as a supplicant to power, he loves to try and suck up to
How is this answering the question?
You go to Solovyev, and Solovyev, someone who, every day is basically supporting nuclear strikes. This guy's a fucking insane guy. He's a mad dog. He's fucked in the head. He's basically calling for nuclear strikes on London. And he calls for genocide every single day. And you went on Solovyov. I mean, I don't know how you can sleep with yourself at night, Jackson. You are such a horrible person in every single way, basically. And
did I leave 1 second?
You started off as a kind of Bernie supporters, and you changed for attention, and it's sad.
I couldn't leave for 1 second. I just had to close my door there. Now we're gonna kick it back
quite
over.
a bit.
Yeah, maybe. I was gonna say I came back and things were right up there again. So once again, Drew Jackson, we love the passion.
That time it was all Drew. I didn't say a word.
I think so. So we're gonna kick it over to you there.
I'll just respond. So, first of all, the Baltic states were looted from the Soviets, from Russia, as you put it.
They don't want to live under Russia. They don't want to be under Russia, cunt. They don't want to be under Russia.
They were looted. Brest-Litovsk was defunct after Brest-Litovsk was defunct after the war. Germany violated all the terms and agreements. It was defunct after Treaty of Versailles. The Baltic states were looted. So I'll make that point. As for the point of NATO being a rogue terrorist threat, that is true. And even even U.S. Secretary of State Baker made the point that, of course, moving anywhere eastward of Germany in terms of NATO armaments would be considered a threat to Russia. He knew that. Every U.S. president knows that. Joe Biden even said it years ago. And yeah, I mean, NATO is about protecting North Atlantic security. It's about protecting European security in the North Atlantic. So the chatter brings up a great point. What the hell is NATO doing, pillaging Libya? Great point.
All right. Any thoughts on that, Drew, or do you want to move on?
NATO intervened in Libya because Gaddafi was openly gloating that he was going to commit genocide against his own people, and obviously it's very sad what's happened post intervention. The problem was that NATO abandoned Libya instead of helping to try the country. So that's basically the one big failure in Libya. But getting rid of Gaddafi, that was a beautiful thing for humanity.
Well, I happen to believe that Gaddafi is one of the most base men to ever live. He was a very successful leader, other than being killed.
Gaddafi died like a dog, and Putin will likely die like a dog.
I'm just going to make my statement at this point. If you're going to interrupt me, I'm just going to talk over you. One of the most base men to ever live. He was vilified by the West because he wanted to create a new African Union and replace the dollar standard in Africa. And you know what they found? You know what they found in Libya? They found weapons of mass destruction in Libya as well.
That's a copy paste.
Let him wrap up. Let's give him 30 seconds.
It was giant gold bricks that the Libyans were going to use to help build up their new reserve currency to replace the dollar, which is interesting because now China and Russia are working on developing a new global reserve currency with BRICS that they're probably going to announce this August at the BRICS summit. And the West is very worried again.
Fuck, man. It's pretty funny. It's funny just because the Gaddafi United States of Africa thing has become like a very funny copy pasta that people post because it's just so stupid. Like, oh, Gaddafi was killed for trying to create a United States of Africa. Very fucking true. BRICS, very fucking true. When the C is invading the I in BRICS, it's they're on the cusp of de-dollarization. It's a fucking meme. It's very funny because all the anti-imperialists they like to pretend that they're like against global American hegemony, blah blah blah. They're trying to support the global South, but really they just want a return to a world based on spheres of influence with the great powers like Russia and China enslaving countries in their sphere of influence. And I don't want to live in that world because I don't want to live in a world where Australia is enslaved to the new emperor of China. I don't want to live in a world where Eastern Europe is enslaved to the Tsar of Russia. People have a right to self-determination. I'm against colonization. And the biggest colonizing imperialist forces in the world today are, China and Russia. And as a opponent of imperialism, as someone who believes in, self-determination for the global South, I can do no more than support Ukraine to the full maximum of my ability against this imperialist war of conquest.
I'm not going to say much. We can move on to the next question, but let me just get this on the record. You are dedicated to opposing imperialism, but you support NATO?
Yes.
Okay.
Because NATO is the biggest anti-imperialist force on earth today because they're opposing Russian imperialism.
Okay.
And they can help to oppose as well Chinese imperialism. So anyone who's anti-imperialist and progressive should support NATO.
Yeah. All right. Totally valid argument. Not even going to question that one.
It's true. I support anarcho-NATOism.
Well, we'll move on from there.
Also, just one last question for Jackson that I have personally. Has he responded to his friendship with Scott Ritter, the pedophile? How did he justify that?
Well, Zelensky's a pedophile. You worship a pedophile.
Given Scott Ritter is a registered sex offender, how do you justify that?
We are fine.
You worship the pedophile Zelensky.
See, this has nothing to do with our topic tonight, guys. So we'll continue on. If you guys want to have that conversation,
but Scott Ritter is actually a registered sex offender. That is.
If you guys want to have that conversation, don't make me mute you. I was gonna say, if you guys want to have that conversation about anything related to any other subject, we're more than welcome to entertain that. But for now, we will try to make sure that our discussion remains on point. Let's continue on. Now I got to scroll down. See, I got myself all messed up here. All right. And no, that's a little bit on the so I will read this one, but I'm going to edit it out just because there is a little bit of a personal insult there, but there is some substance.
I have the personal insult. I don't mind.
Oh, that's, I was going to say, I've got to say it. So Harold Sullivan, 999. Why does Drew Pavlov accuse China and Russia of genocide while praising Western imperialism and NATO? So
I don't support Western imperialism. For example, when when the Australian military was guilty of war crimes in Afghanistan, I openly called for trials and I openly called for full investigations. That's much more than you're ever going to see in China and Russia, because every single day when the Russian government commits war crimes in Ukraine, they award the soldiers that are behind the war crimes. So, for example, the detachment that carried out the Bucha massacre, they gave them awards. So the Russian government rewards war crimes, whereas the Australian government investigates war crimes and carries out trials against when it comes to war crimes. And I want full investigation of any Western soldier responsible for war crimes, because unlike, you know, hypocrites like Jackson, I don't support war crimes. I mean, can Jackson call for war crimes investigations against Russian soldiers? He won't. He can't because he can't bite the hand that feeds him.
Yeah, if any Russian soldiers are found guilty of committing war crimes, yeah, they should be investigated and held accountable. Simple. So the difference between
so do you believe in
no, you just had your you had your bit of commentary. You had your bit of commentary.
Let's let him
Okay,
speak.
now I'm gonna talk. So the difference between me and Drew is I'm not a fat idiot who thinks that NATO is an anti-imperialist force. Like, holy shit, how stupid!
The difference between me and Jackson is I don't support genocide for Russian.
I'm gonna let Jackson speak.
How stupid do you have to be to honestly sit here, look at me in the eyes, and tell me that like Jens Stoltenberg is the face of anti-imperialism in the 21st
No, not Jim
century?
Stoltenberg. It's Zelensky.
Oh,
Let's let
yes.
Jackson
So the
continue,
guy,
please.
so we'll just finish off on this point here. Now, this brings me to an even better point. The guy who has cucked himself and his entire country to NATO, who you said is not the face of anti-imperialism, by the way, and has taken his country, sent hundreds of thousands of men to their death, and a suicidal war being led by Nazis.
No, Russia launched a war of aggression.
He has
They're
imprisoned all
defending themselves.
dissidents. He has consolidated all media into one 24/7 state-controlled media apparatus in Ukraine. He has imprisoned and disappeared all dissident officials. In
Everything you accuse Zelensky of, Putin is actually guilty of. That's the thing.
He has disappeared and imprisoned all dissident political parties, almost, not all of them, but pretty much all of them. And apparently now I'm supposed to believe that this guy, Zelensky, is the bastion of freedom and democracy and anti-imperialism.
Yes,
Okay.
Zelensky is the forefront. Zelensky is at the forefront of anti-imperialism globally. He's probably the most prominent anti-imperialist in the world today because he's fighting against a Russian war of imperial conquest. He's fighting for his country's independence. So this is a decolonial war. It's a war of national independence for Ukraine. And all these, it's very hilarious, Jackson, because all the supposed crimes you allege that Zelensky is guilty of, Putin actually is guilty of. So if you're talking about, a completely destroyed media sphere in Russia where there's absolutely no freedom of speech, there's no freedom of speech in Russia. You can't even call it a war. People who call it a war are arrested. There was a little girl who was taken away from her parents and her dad was actually taken to prison simply because she criticized the war. So, everything you accuse Zelensky of, saying he's a dictator, well, Putin's actually guilty of it. And you say, Zelensky took these men to their deaths. No, it's Russia. It's Russia that took these innocent people to their deaths, because Russia is the one that is firing tanks. Russia is the one that is firing missiles. Russia is the one that sent tanks over the border. So you say, oh no, the West tried a coup in Ukraine, tried to seize the government of Ukraine. But Russia has invaded with tanks and tried to seize the government of Ukraine and tried to launch a war of imperial conquest and tried to wipe Ukraine from the face of the map. And you defend it. So every single thing you accuse Zelensky of, it's completely it's baseless. It's lies, because you're accusing Zelensky of the crimes that the Russians are guilty of.
I'm actually not. I'm accusing Zelensky of very unique crimes, like disappearing my good friend Gonzalo Lira, putting me on a kill list.
He deserved it. Fucking deserved it.
Okay, so how are you going to say that Putin is so bad for it when you're saying that Gonzalo Lira, quote unquote, deserved it? It's hilarious.
Gonzalo got fucking arrested. Gonzalo got arrested.
So let me just finish my point.
Let's let Jackson finish up, and you can
Thank you.
say your piece there,
I've been
Drew.
interrupted more in this debate than any debate I've ever participated in, and I still knocked you off the floor. I defeated you.
Jackson, you actually got very simple things wrong about Ukraine.
Oh my God. We're going to talk about getting things wrong, Drew. You didn't know the basic facts of anything. and look
You
at
didn't
the
know
poll.
who. You didn't know
I'm gonna
who
interrupt-
Amin
I'm gonna
Tartar
interrupt
murdered was. You don't know who
The
Gherkin was.
poll-
I'm going to interrupt you
Stop,
here
stop
again
interrupting.
because you know there's been a lot of interruptions from both of you
Yes,
during
there
the
have
debate, and that's fine. You know, that's part of the open discussion. You know, we got a bit of a delay, but let's let Jackson speak here for 30 seconds there, Drew, and then we'll kick it over to
I
you
was
for 15.
literally talking about how much I got interrupted, and he couldn't stop his fat mouth from interrupting me again. So,
Let's remain
anyways, the
respectful,
point.
please.
Yeah, it's not respectful, but he hasn't been respectful this entire debate. So,
Set a precedent.
anyways, the point is that Zelensky is a unique criminal, and that he is simultaneously getting fucked in the ass and fucking his entire country in the ass at the same time. It's like what do you call that? Like one of the motorboat situations where like he's getting fucked, but he's also fucking everyone else, and imprisoning all these people, putting me on a kill list, putting lots of people,
Putting
kids
you on a kill list. It's not a kill list,
killed-
Jackson. It's
he
not a
killed
kill
the-
list.
So
Don't
why
fucking.
so
Don't
wait. This
big
will
up
be the last
yourself.
thing I say.
Let's
last
let him
thing
finish
I say.
up. 10 seconds.
Last thing I say. Why then, when they killed Daria Dugina and so many others who were
Daria
on that,
deserved it.
Stop,
let me-
please. We're going to let Jackson speak for 10 seconds to finish up.
you say Daria deserved it. You know, I wish no harm upon you ever in my life, but you know, everyone, I'm gonna die someday. When I die, I'm gonna go to heaven. When you die,
You're going to hell, Jackson.
not so much. So, anyways, when people like Daria Dugina, who was on that list, and many others who've been on that list, have actually been assassinated by Kiev authorities or SBU officials or officers, why is it then that they put liquidated over the faces of those people who were killed by Ukrainian authorities on the list?
Look, Daria was dealt with because she advocated genocide. She devoted her life to genocide. Her father devoted himself to genocide. The only sad thing is that Dugan wasn't in the car with her.
So Daria was on the list, and when she got killed, they put liquidated over her face on the list. And the United States has come out and said it was Ukraine who was behind the killing of her. So, so are you saying it is a kill list or it's not a kill list?
No, it's not a kill
They
list.
just
It's
kill
not
the
a kill
people
list.
on the kill list, and then the kill list celebrates the killing of the people on the
It's not
kill
a kill
list by
list.
Ukraine.
There are tens of thousands of people on that particular list, Jackson. You're not important enough to be on any Ukrainian kill list. We're only talking about people like Solovyov, Dugan, the people who are ultimately the most responsible for the war. People like Solovyov, Dugan, you know, these are the people that helped put Russian tanks into Ukraine, and so they deserve it.
Dugan's never talked with Putin, so I don't really know what you're talking about there.
Dugan advocated genocide. His own quote: "The Ukrainians are a race of sewer dwellers, and they must be genocided." This is his quote, and he also said that the only solution is to kill Ukrainians. That's his quote. So I'm not going to expend tears when Dugan dies. I think Dugan should be at the top of the Ukrainian military target list.
So I can't confirm that Dugan has said that or who he was talking about, but let's say hypothetically he did say that, and he has never met Putin, he's never talked to Putin. So how is it that because one guy he's not even that influential in Russia, if you talk to any Russian, they'll tell you that.
No, he's very influential. We're talking about the top propagandists, the top 5 or 6 propagandists.
If you're going to you can't just keep interrupting. I will just mute you and talk over you to my own audience, which is where the vast majority of people are listening right now. But you bring up this point about Dugan. So Dugan's not even that influential within Russia. He's much more influential within the West and the people who soy out over his comments, which in many cases are based. Can't say I agree with everything he's said, and
you agree with the genocide Ukrainians part?
But okay, well, I'm just going to mute you now because you can. I'll unmute you when I'm done. So he's someone who's like, I guess you're saying is very influential. It wasn't even him who was killed. It was his daughter who was killed, assassinated. She was 29 years old. She was like, no one even really knew who she was. She's like I guess, journalist or a commentator. And her life was taken because your country that you profess to say is the home of democracy and anti-imperialism massacred her in a car bombing.
Massacred her. Jackson.
Even Biden admits that.
She was a Russian state television propagandist. She visited occupied areas. She helped to mobilize support for the war. The top couple Russian propagandists inside Russia who mobilized support for the war, they're legitimate military targets. Daria deserved it. The only sad thing is that Dugan wasn't in the car with her. Obviously, it was a mistake because they wanted Dugan mainly rather than her. It's sad that he wasn't in the car himself.
So if Russia targeted a Ukrainian TV personality, would that be justified?
No, because Russia's the invading party. Russia's the party of aggression. Russia's the one that's invading a sovereign country. So that wouldn't be justified.
Well, the only qualms you seem to have today was over Russia's killing of civilians, but you just justified the killing of a civilian with no military ranking.
Daria and the top Russian propagandists inside Russia aren't civilians.
Let's let Jackson finish.
Daria was not a governmental official. She was not
She practically was.
Let's let him finish, please, and then we'll
What do you mean
over.
she practically was? Daria
because
was
Russian state television is part of the regime propaganda apparatus.
Okay, so I've had probably 3 appearances, maybe 4 on Russian state TV. So do you want to see me get killed?
No, Jackson, for the sake of the discussion.
So, but you just made that argument for Daria Dugina, so shut the fuck up. So she's not a governmental official.
She made herself combatant when she went to Russia.
Not a governmental official. She was a civilian,
15 seconds,
not
Jackson.
a governmental official, and not a military official. And she was killed by the terrorist Nazi dogs in Ukraine that you profess to support as the bastion of democracy.
Daria went to Russian occupied territories. She and her father were instrumental in pushing for genocide against Ukraine. After World War II, the editor of Der Stürmer, one of the top Nazi propagandists, was put to death as part of the Nuremberg trials. So top regime
how is Daria for
the regime are legitimate military targets.
So last question, how is Daria influential in Putin taking the decision to launch the SMO? How is Daria specifically responsible?
Well, she's been pushing for it she and her father have been pushing for it for years. But look, as I said though, Daria wasn't the main target. It's sad that they didn't get her father. What
the fuck just happened?
Oh, we seem to have lost Drew. It's not on my end. We'll give him a second there. But if not, then we'll just continue on now with the.
I really definitely hope the FSB didn't pay him a visit.
No, dogs were having a fight. Sad. All good.
Oh, sorry to hear that. I know all about that. So well, let's continue on. We got lots of other questions here, and like I said, to me it sounds like you guys got lots that you can go down that is actually, like I said, relevant to what we're talking about. I know you guys you got a lot of fire towards each other now after the discussion that you had, but it does seem like we're still getting some good juicy discussion out of these super chats. So if you guys are good to keep going,
I was just going to say Gonzalo Lira, this fat man who basically made a living trying to encourage men to rape women as part of his creepy dating simulator games. I mean, he was arrested legitimately because he was pushing for the Russian invasion of Ukraine while living in Ukraine. So, for example, during World War II, people who advocated the invasion of the United States were arrested. That's very legitimate. As if he would not have been arrested in Russia if he was advocating for Ukraine in the same manner.
No, I'm sorry. So I'm just going to ask that you don't interrupt me while I'm doing the.
I'm
just doing some of the housekeeping here. So I am going to remind everybody that we're still doing our Q&A, and I just wanted to let you guys know, once again, if there's anything you wanted to grab, whether the dogs are fighting or if you want to grab a drink of water, use the restroom, that's fine, and we'll continue on if you guys are still good to go. I know we've gone a little overtime from what we consented to, so Jackson, are you still good?
Yeah, I'm good. I think it's funny that Drew called Gonzalo fat. I mean, just look in the mirror, Drew.
Okay, well,
Are you still bulking? Are you still bulking?
Let me continue my housekeeping.
It's okay, Jackson. It's okay. Don't soy out.
And Drew,
still bulking?
And Drew, you are still good to continue?
I am. I'll go for a bit more. Go for a bit more.
Thank you, guys. And thank you to our live chat. It's important that we make sure that we are respecting our speakers' time. They're here having this discussion on their own time, so we want to make sure that we're being respectful in our live chat and trying to engage with our subject here of tonight, which is the Russia war in Ukraine justified? So we had an interesting question here. Let me just continue on. I actually had to go into my my old copy and pastes here. So Sunflower, I missed your question earlier, but thanks for your question there and being a member here for over a year. Sorry for missing that again. So they'd asked a question here: ignoring any war crimes is a mere act of war by Russia. Is that justified? So ignoring any war crimes is a mere act of war. What do you guys think about that?
Ignoring war crimes is a mere act of war. If ignoring war crimes is a mere act of war, then the United States and Britain are sure guilty of a lot of war aggravations against the Soviet Union during the Nuremberg trials.
Any thoughts from you there, Drew?
Sorry, wait. Can you repeat that?
Well, they had to reiterate because I did have to go back here and ask them what their question was. So they had said something along the lines of ignoring any war crimes is the mere act of war by Russia justified. Ignoring the war crimes is that justified?
Well, look, even the invasion of Ukraine is a war crime because it is technically against international law a war of aggression.
Okay.
That would make sense if any country, any power in the West had, I guess, adhered to the UN Charter or international law anytime since Putin took power. I guess that would make sense then.
Well, for what it's worth, the American invasion of Iraq, was also completely illegitimate and not justified. So I do not believe in the invasion of sovereign country.
All right, I'm sorry to cut you off there. So our super chatter did clarify in our live chat here from Sunflower, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering your question here. They said, I'm asking, ignoring any war crimes by Russia after the fact, was the mere declaration of war by Russia justifiable? So I think we might get that clarified.
Justify U.S. participation in a war? Is that what they're saying?
I think they're just asking in general, like, if that can be something that's justified based on that.
They're saying putting aside the atrocities and war crimes, is Russia's decision to invade Ukraine justified? That's the question, isn't it?
I would say that is a good summarization of it. I just it's written out a little strange. Sorry about that, Sunflower, but I think we've got it. So I'll let you expound on that, Jackson.
No, I mean, you shouldn't ignore war crimes, but the fact of the matter is Russia did not start the war crimes here. The party who started war crimes was Ukraine and slaughtering all the civilians in the Donbas over the past 8 years. People say the war started February 24th. No, not really. The war started back in 2014. And it was tipped off, not with a war crime, but with an illegal seizure of power with the coup in 2014.
All right. Any other thoughts there from either of you, or shall we move on?
Well, no, because Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 and it kidnapped and killed Ukrainian civilians who protested against the annexation in the occupied areas. And it was a war of aggression from 2014 onwards on Russia's part.
All right. I feel like we've expounded on that, so let's continue on. And thank you again, Sunflower. I'm glad that we got your question. Oh, excuse me. All figured out there. So let's continue on with our super chats. So George D for $5. Jackson, can you Google civilian deaths in Ukraine live right now and read it out loud with the source so Drew can learn something? Did you want to bring up a screen share with the
I don't even have to Google it because he can look on the Euromaidan press, which I don't think he's going to claim is a pro-Russian source. And I believe most recently, it was like in January or February, they claimed that there was about 8,500 something civilians who had been killed, which I even think that's a bit low. But that's from Euromaidan press, which is in no way, shape, or form pro-Russian. They're backed by Western governments. And I'm not great at math, but that I'm pretty sure is less than the vast majority of the 15,000 who were killed in the Donbas the years prior to the Russian invasion in February of last year.
No, because basically what's happening is they're only verifying, people who we can confirm with photo evidence have been killed. So, for example, in occupied areas where they can't confirm the death count, they're obviously not counting that. So we will never know, for example, just how many people were killed in Mariupol.
So
no, because
for the sake of our super chatter,
for example,
just to be fair,
the bombing of the City Drama Theatre, what was the death count there, Jackson?
Well, I'm gonna do for a super chatter, and hold on to that point, Drew. I'm just gonna let you all know, just for our live chat, because I did check it out right quick. I went over, and I don't know if anybody thinks this is reputable, but United Nations Human Rights, it's ohcr.org. I looked it up right quick for a super chatter, just to respect what they had asked there for us to look it up. It says right here, according to this source, that there's been 19,324 civilian casualties. So I'll let you guys expound a little bit on the on what I've uncovered here, whether you think the source is reputable, and what you think that that number means. So, Drew, I'll let you kick it back into your question, but just for the sake of our super chatter, I did want to make sure that we respected their ask and looked that up. So that's for you, and we'll kick it back over to you, Drew.
Well, just for example, in places that saw the worst fighting, for example, Bakhmut or Mariupol, we don't know the full civilian death count. And so I'm asking Jackson, for example, with just as one example, take the example of the City Drama Theatre bombing, where there were hundreds of civilians that were bombed. What was the death count there? You don't know.
So we do know actually roughly how many have been killed, because Russia and Ukraine both have to report numbers for this, and there are oftentimes international observers on site who get to at least see.
There weren't international observers in Mariupol.
Red Cross?
I mean, people weren't able to get into occupied Mariupol.
Red Cross.
They're not able to count civilian deaths.
So what were they there doing?
Red Cross, even Red Cross's operations were severely restricted by Russia.
For example, what were they doing?
There were big efforts by Red Cross, for example, to try and evacuate some of the occupied, some of the Ukrainian soldiers, and Russia.
Soldiers, no.
Yes,
no.
soldiers.
No, none of them were. Red Cross didn't evacuate a single Ukrainian soldier. No,
but they were advocating for a deal to be struck, and this was ignored by Russia.
So why'd you say that they played a big role in evacuating Ukrainian soldiers when you and I both know? Don't interrupt me. Don't interrupt me. Don't interrupt me. You and I both know. Stop interrupting me.
Let's let him finish up. 15 seconds.
You and I both know that Red Cross went in. The deal was for Red Cross to go in, evacuate civilians that were being held by Ukrainians in the Azov, steelwork factory bunker, and then also to get any civilians who had been killed out of there so they could give the families or whoever the bodies and give them a proper burial. So no, they didn't. In fact, the individuals who were down there that Red Cross did in fact come into contact with, who were Ukrainian soldiers, were all captured by Russia, and they were strip searched, and Russia actually filmed all of their Nazi Hitler tattoos one by one.
Red Cross wanted to strike a deal with Russia to evacuate some of the soldiers. This was ignored. Let's actually see Red Cross's quotations. I mean, Red Cross itself said the situation in Mariupol is apocalyptic. It called for a ceasefire. This was completely ignored. The Red Cross tried to create civilian evacuation corridors. Russia bombed the civilian evacuation corridors. So we don't know the full total of the number of people who were killed by Russia in Mariupol. Red Cross said, Red Cross denounced the apocalyptic destruction in Mariupol.
Yeah, apocalyptic destruction of a city that had been evacuated. And there were civilians there.
City officials reported. I mean, city officials.
Okay, I literally can't do this debate if you're just going to interrupt me every few seconds.
Let's try not
to.
So
I'm going to give you one more chance. It is literally impossible to debate you if you are going to interrupt me every time I speak. Okay, Drew? So be a good boy and keep your mouth shut, okay?
Shut the fuck up, Jackson. Come on.
Keep your fucking fat mouth
hold on.
Shut.
We are moving away from our discussion.
But let me finish my point.
15 seconds,
You
please.
made the claim that Ukrainian soldiers were being evacuated by Red Cross.
No.
I countered that claim. And that claim is just that claim is just as false as the claim that the laughable, insanely shameful and laughable claim that 50,000 civilians were killed in Mariupol. Do you know how insane of a comment that is?
Back to you, Drew.
It's not. It's not. Firstly, I didn't claim that Red Cross evacuated Ukrainian soldiers. I said they wanted to do a deal for that.
No,
and
that's
Russia
not what you
ignored it.
said.
Let him speak, Jackson.
No, that is what I
That's his turn
said.
now.
Red Cross wanted to do a deal for the evacuation of soldiers, and this was ignored by Russia. There was Russian bombing of the civilian evacuation corridors. This is a confirmed fact. And we don't know the full death toll in Mariupol. We know that by April, the estimate was 25,000 civilians. This was the mayor, and this was Ukrainian authorities saying, tens of thousands. There were discoveries of 10,000 new mass graves. This is satellite figures. Associated Press said death toll may be up to 3 times that figure. So we can't know the full number, but we know it was tens of thousands of people. And Russia was bombing the evacuation checkpoints. Russia bombed the Mariupol maternity hospital. Russia bombed the children's hospital. It was completely apocalyptic what Russia was doing. Can you explain, Jackson? Can you explain to us why Russia bombed the maternity hospital and the children's hospital in Mariupol?
100%, because the Ukrainian fighters had taken over these buildings, as Amnesty International cited and noted in the report, and they were using these civilians in the buildings as human shields, as well as an Azovstal. And they were firing. They created de facto military targets on civilian infrastructure. The Ukrainian military is so stupid, they even put out footage and photography of Ukrainian soldiers staging military bases inside of school gymnasiums inside of Mariupol. So, this is a very well documented fact. And
do you trust the credibility of Amnesty International, considering you keep on citing them?
No, I trust the credibility of photography.
Because Amnesty International, June 30, 2022.
Wait, shut the fuck
Let's
up.
let Jackson finish his point there.
Shut the fuck up.
Was a war crime.
Shut the fuck
You
up.
asked a question there, Drew, so we'll let Jackson finish up.
I trust the veracity of the photos and videos of Ukrainian soldiers fighting from otherwise civilian zones, as you would put it, that they had turned into de facto military targets.
Russia was attacking civilian targets. This is why it was a war basically of extermination in Mariupol. Russia was targeting civilian targets from the start. They attacked the maternity hospital. They attacked the children's hospital. They bombed the theater. There were hundreds of civilians holed up in there. As I said earlier, they scrawled in Russian on the pavement outside, "Children present." Russian fighter jets bombed the Mariupol theater. Hundreds were killed. This is a confirmed war crime. There's photo evidence of the destruction of the theater, and we have proof that there were hundreds of civilians inside the theater when it was bombed. So you can't justify that. You can't explain that, Jackson. You have no answer for that because it is absolutely indefensible.
I can answer that, and I can defend that, because as with the Azovstal Steelworks bunker, that was a just military target because there was hundreds, if not... Actually, I think there was
the Mariupol theater was a justified
military target. Drew, we're giving him 30 seconds here. If you could please try not to interrupt here, because I don't want to have to keep placing you on the mute there and then having to unmute you. So we'll just let Jackson finish up his point here for 15 seconds.
Yes. The reason why, and I'm going to take a little longer than 15 seconds because he just went on and on and on. The reason why these zones or these buildings are considered military targets is because Amnesty International and the Ukrainian military have both admitted to the fact that they've turned these buildings into military targets. And we have tons of proof of that, from gymnasiums to hospitals to the Azovstal Steelworks plant, which is where the battle finished. And lo and behold, that's a civilian target, but there was thousands of Ukrainian soldiers fighting from within the insides of the Azovstal Steelworks bunker. So you'd probably call that a civilian target. My response is, if that's a civilian zone, why on earth are Ukrainian soldiers fighting from inside of the civilian zone?
You have no justification. You say that the Mariupol theater was a military target. That is crazy. There are hundreds of civilians inside. Ukrainian forces were not present there. This is a complete lie. You're justifying war crimes against civilians. It is very obvious from the very start of the conflict that Russia was targeting civilian zones. And that is why Putin
10 seconds.
and all the top Russian propagandists were crowing about how they were going to freeze Ukraine into submission. They're targeting civilian infrastructure. They're targeting civilian infrastructure from the start of the invasion. They're trying to freeze Ukraine, trying to starve Ukraine into hunger and submission. So it's very obvious from the very start, Russia has targeted civilian areas because they want to, they're copying the same strategy that they used in Grozny and in Aleppo. They want to basically make the city unlivable. They want to make the entire country unlivable for civilians so that the whole regime, so that everything, so that the regime can come in and seize all the land. This is what they want. They want to, I mean, they want to make life unbearable for civilians. And this is genocide because by creating the conditions whereby life is impossible for civilians, that is genocide. That is actually under the Genocide Convention.
All right. So,
and I gave you an example where 500 Ukrainians were killed at the Mariupol theater, and you were just saying it was a military target. It's a military target, and that's fucking sick.
All right, over to you, Jackson. He's called you out there, so we'll kick it over to you for another minute there.
I mean, I don't have anything to say. I've made my point over and over. When you have a military that's turning active civilian zones into military targets, that is, first of all, illegal. They are using the civilians as human shields. Amnesty International proved that, and Ukrainian military release photographs and video prove that. So I don't know. It's very hard breaking through with someone who is, who has engulfed themselves in so much propaganda. There's all this propaganda smoke. They can't even see the light of day because they've just ingested so much of this BS. It's actually very sad. It's a problem we see in a lot of dysgenic Western propagandists today, especially amongst Gen Z. I happen to be one of the only base ones that has broken through this. But I hope one day Drew gets a gym membership and sees the light.
All right. Let's continue on from there. So, Threat to Democracy, thanks for being in our live chat again. For $9.99, Drew, are you aware of the Brereton? I don't think they spelled that right.
Yeah, the Brereton report. That's the Afghan crimes.
Okay, sorry about that. And the murder, rape, and torture of innocent civilians by your pathetic military in a country they had no business in. Are you a report and election denier?
Firstly, I don't believe the Brereton report contains rape allegations. I read the report, and I called for investigations and trials of any Australian service member that was guilty of war crimes. So unlike Jackson and unlike the Russians who, will never try their own people for war crimes, never. I'm against war crimes. If Australian forces carry out war crimes, then I'll call it out and I'll call for trials and I'll call for prosecutions because, I don't support war crimes. It's very simple. The point that Australia had no business in Afghanistan, look, 9/11 was launched from Afghanistan by the Al-Qaeda forces that were loyal to the Taliban. So there was justification originally for, the intervention in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, it lost its way. And, Bush went into Iraq, which was a total disaster and the wrong thing to do. So, that was really wrong. But I am against Australian war crimes in Afghanistan. I called for prosecutions and trials because I'm not a hypocrite like Jackson. I'll never call for, I'll never defend war crimes. I'm not going to say, oh, those are justified military targets when we're talking about the bombing of hundreds of civilians in drama theaters in Mariupol.
War crimes. You support the number one war criminal on the face of the planet today. You support the ISIS of Europe. You support the Osama bin Laden of Europe. You literally don't know.
You're talking about Putin, right?
No,
the ISIS of Europe, the number one war criminal.
That would be Volodymyr Zelensky and his Azovite soldiers.
You might have been right that it is one Volodymyr. It's Volodymyr Putin.
If there's one man responsible for more war crimes and more civilian death over the past, 50 years, than anyone else in Europe, I'd have to say it is Volodymyr Zelensky.
That is complete fantasy. Jackson, you are living in an alternative reality, in an alternative universe. It's really sad. You're living inside a simulation. The Matrix has completely got you.
Bro, you live in
sorry.
You live inside of Australia. The whole country is a simulation at this point. Again, no one
very funny, very funny.
No one would notice if Australia is saying.
All right, we're losing
you talk about mainstream media propaganda. You just buy up Russian propaganda. You buy up Russian propaganda every single day.
Do they broadcast CNN in Australia? Do they broadcast CNN down there?
I don't watch CNN.
Let's move on, guys, because we've lost sight of our substance here. And that happens, and that's fine. Like I said, it's gonna get juicy.
I've got based beautiful sausage dogs.
Please don't interrupt. I'm so
just
sorry.
have this sad apartment in LA with a fucking male.
Drew, all right, Drew, let's not.
A fun life. Yours sucks.
All right, we're gonna keep going with the super chats and keep it on subject because, like I said, we want to be able to keep this on point.
Fat baby
and
Hitler.
If I have to mute you, I will, and we're not going to do any more mudslinging. We got a lot of super chats. There's a lot of people that want to hear from you. So, like I said, I don't want to indiscriminately kick one of you out of the Zoom for not following the rules. I'm pretty chill as far as trying to keep the conversation going. But let's not keep pushing the buttons here. I got 2 kids. I know how to do it. My name is Jeffrey. $5 to Drew. Did I already read this one? Yes, sorry. My name is Jeffrey, $5. Thanks, Jeffrey. To Drew, what is your response to Amnesty? I did read that one. I'm sorry. See, you guys got me all messed up here. I'm gonna blame you guys for squabbling. No, I'm kidding. I enjoy it. You guys are having fun. Let's see here. Supposed defensive alliance. I did not read that one. Sorry. So I had to read through. Counselor Guy, $5. Supposed defensive alliance involved in Libya and Syria. Russia has every right to not want NATO at their front door. NATO is an agent of chaos.
I think we did that one.
We did that one too. I got to delete some of these. All right.
No worries.
Sorry, guys. 2 seconds. That's what I get for trying to go back and find super chats from people that are like, are you going to read my super chat? And I'm like, I'm sorry. Maybe I missed that.
I have a question for Drew.
Let's go for it while I get myself.
All right,
sorted.
yeah. Well, you figure that out.
I
Drew,
have it.
How do you feel about all the accusations on Twitter and Discord that you've been fucking your dogs?
Very funny. Very fucking funny, man.
No, I'm serious.
So stupid.
All right, that's not a valid question.
My poor dog had a fight. My poor dogs had a fight earlier in the chat.
No, I know you've been having difficulties with women. I know you've had.
I'm very sorry that you don't have any.
So we
don't have any. I look after the dogs.
We got so many juicy questions, guys. Let's try not to break any rules here, so we can keep going on here. And yeah, I'm glad I'm talking over you because I can hear you. Threat to democracy 499. How does Drew feel about the Nazis in Ukraine who are proud Nazis who swear to cleanse Ukraine of Russian-speaking and Russian-born citizens? Any thoughts there on that one?
Every single country has a far-right menacing presence. Every single country, Australia has it, America has it, every single country on earth, Russia has it. Russia has probably more neo-Nazis than Ukraine. So for example, like one of the founders of Wagner has SS tattoos on his collarbones. So, Russia has a massive neo-Nazi problem itself. Every country, unfortunately, has these far-right elements. And, thankfully in Ukraine, they're very marginalized. They didn't even get 2% of the vote at the recent parliamentary elections. They didn't even get into the parliament. They're very marginalized. You compare that to, say, America, where the far right is, big chunk of Congress. You compare that to Russia, where the far right is in power with Putin. And even one of the founders of Wagner has SS tattoos on his collarbones. It's very sad.
Yeah, I'll respond to that too. These Nazis were in power from 2014 to 2019 for the most part, and they still exert the power of the bullet upon Zelensky's head, even though they're just mainly been held to holding these military ranks now. But I thank Putin for going in and helping the people of the Donbas, the ethnic Russians who are being slaughtered by these Nazis. And
Russia's
I also, I'm not done.
I'm not done. Finish up. 15 seconds.
Please
buddy.
let me finish. It will be quick. I want everyone to comment in the chat now, #save Drew's dog, because I hope that just like Putin saved the people from the Nazis in the Donbass, someone saves Drew's dog, because that dog we don't really know what's happening. I hear these theories, but we should all want to save Drew's dog.
Oh, that's terribly not on topic. So we'll continue on and see if we can get something more out of here. So threat to
All dogs had a
democracy.
fight. I'm trying to protect them.
So threat to
The other dogs
democracy.
fought with Matt.
We got a lot of super chats here. We want to respect our audience. So threat to democracy, $4.99. Drew, you don't have to answer this. He asked, are you over 18 and have you attended higher education after junior high or high school? Curious as to where he learned his communication skills. So you can comment on that, or we can just skip it because it's somewhat a little on the edge there.
Genius.
Related, is it?
I'm 24 years old. I graduated with I graduated high school with brilliant marks. I was in the top 5% of the graduating cohort in Queensland, and I have almost finished my university. I have almost perfect grade 7 point average, so which is high distinction. So I've been invited to speak at Oxford University. So I'm very, very proud of my education background.
All right. Excellent. And where we're getting that question there, we'll just ask, where can everybody find you fellas, just before I go to the next super chat? We got some links in the description, of course, and if we don't, we'll have them shortly. But if you guys want to tell everybody where they can find you guys in the future.
Well, if they want to, they can find me on Twitter, Drew Pavlou, and I'm on Instagram and YouTube and all these sorts of different platforms just under Drew Pavlou.
All right. And you, Jackson?
At Jackson Hinkle everywhere. I know everyone's probably gonna want to follow along, so I'm on Twitter, Rumble, YouTube, and that's about it.
All right. I just gotta undo the screen change that I did for you there. All right. I got your face back in there. All right, let's continue on with our super chats. So Goran, $20.
Wait, no one wanted to ask me where my college experience was?
I mean, if you want to espouse, I mean, it's not really related, and we should try to keep it quick. But for sure, if you want to give us 15 seconds and describe, are you over 18 and did you attend a higher education? Sure, if you want to answer that, you go for it.
Yeah,
15 seconds.
I'll answer that. So I was not indoctrinated at a liberal propaganda university like Drew Pavlou, and I did not subject myself to Nazi Hitlerite propaganda. I did not go to college. I'm a self-made man. I'm not haven't lived at my parents' house since I was 17, unlike Drew, who's still at his parents' house. And Drew, did you just make sure your mom's doing okay? Okay. So I'm a self-made man. I'm very proud of that.
All right. Well, we'll continue on. Threat to democracy again. Oh no, not you again yet. We're gonna get there. Goron for $20. Ask guy. I don't know who the ask guy. Maybe it's me. You don't know what I got. All right. Ask guy if he ever. Who is ask guy? I just don't know who they're referring to. Let's continue on. If he ever been to Bosnia, because his facts about what happened are not even close to what happened there. I lived there for 4 years during the war. I hope he didn't just watch CNN, BBC, and so on. So I think that's for you there, Drew.
The Serbs were very open about wanting genocide against the Bosnians. We all know their famous, infamous, songs of the era, remove kebab, all those stupid references. So they were very open about their genocidal intentions in Bosnia, and there's a lot of evidence about their genocide.
All right. Let's continue on there. Threat to democracy. We're back again. Threat to democracy. Thanks so much for being here. $4.99. How does Drew feel about the... that one I must have copy and pasted twice, or you said it again. Light of the twin lamps for $10. Question for Jackson. You support ethnicity-driven secession for Eastern Ukraine by Russians? Would you support parts of the American Southwest that are majority ethnic Mexican to secede or join Mexico?
I guess if the American government was systematically slaughtering ethnic Mexicans and saying that they couldn't speak Spanish in the United States, and was taking a whole host of other, punitive measures against them, then yeah, I would support the secession of Mexicans into Mexico, but that's not the case. And in fact, I don't support ethno-states. That's why Israel's not a real country. And I believe that America is going to not only maintain its current borders, but my grand vision, and actually the grand vision of the founding fathers, is to liberate Canada. So I think in some time in my lifetime, you will see the liberation of all of Canada.
All right. Well, I'm in Canada, so hey, here I am. All right. Anyways, let's continue on. Let me just get my screens figured out back there again, because you guys moving around a little bit there. That's not fun. All right, there we go. We're all sorted out. And Jackson from Otter $5. Why do you refuse to call this a war? Please elaborate and explain how it is not a war, and also why do you associate with Scott Ritter? I'm not sure who that is, so we'll try to focus on the main part, which I think is why do you refuse to call this a war? Please elaborate and explain how it's not a war.
Like colloquially, whatever the fucking word is, I do call it a war. I say Ukraine war all the time. I say to my YouTube headlines, I say it all the time. But it is technically, as they call it, Russia calls it a special military operation. But just for sake of keeping things short, I usually just say war rather than special military operation. But in technical terms, like if I was interviewing a Russian politician, or any politician for that matter, US politician, I would say special military operation, because if Ukraine or the United States thinks that this is what wartime mobilization looks like in Russia, they are sorely mistaken. Okay, I mean, just to wrap up the statement here, the Russians, they put forward a good chunk of men, but they haven't mobilized their entire economy. A lot of these men are back, they are reservists, not on the front. They have extremely high turnover on the front. Like most Russian fighters don't spend more than a day on the front, with the exception of the fighting we saw in Bakhmut, which took the headlines the past few weeks when Russia liberated it. And, you ask, what does a Russian war look like? A Russian war looks like 27 million people dying for the cause of, maintaining the Russian sovereignty and Russian culture. And they are dead serious when it comes to defending their land, their territory, their people. And this is in no way, shape, or form anything close to a wartime mobilization.
All right. Any thoughts over there, Drew, or do you want to continue on?
It's a joke to pretend that Russia hasn't basically been waging total war. They are going deep into their post-World War II military stockpiles. For example, they're bringing tanks out of storage that were used in the 60s and 70s. And so, this has been a war of total mobilization for Russia, and they've lost. They haven't been able to take Kiev. They won't be able to take the entire country. They will continue, unfortunately, they will continue to try slaughter Ukrainian civilians, but ultimately their attempt to conquer Ukraine has failed. And you can just look at Bakhmut. They took Bakhmut, but even listen to Gherkin. He says on his own Telegram, he calls it a self-extermination effort by Wagner and the Russian military. These are the guys who literally started the war in the Donbas, and they're saying this is insane, this is so incompetent. Everybody knows that it is, it is a crazy military. I mean, everyone knows this is a crazy thing for Putin to do, for Russia to do. It's an insane war. There have been no victories for them, and it's a collapse. They're collapsing now.
All right. Let's continue on from there. Scroll back up here. All right. To Jackson. This is from My Name is Jeffrey. Are Ukes justified in being displeased with the Russian involvement in their country since its inception? Isn't it fairly reasonable as to why Ukes want closer ties to the EU after 2 decades of corruption? So 2 decades of corruption is what they said there, yeah. So I'll let you expound on that there.
Can you reread the first part of that question?
Are Ukes justified? So are Ukrainians justified in being displeased with the Russian involvement in their country since its inception?
Yes, of course. And that's how the Euromaidan protests began. It began as not co-opted movement. People who are maybe ill-informed, they're overhype everything. They say like, oh, the Euromaidan coup was a U.S. plot from its inception. That's actually wrong. Euromaidan started off with noble intentions. Intentions I disagree with, I guess, but noble in the sense that it was not a CIA, plot from the very beginning. And those were examples of people who actually had discontent with Russia. Speaking broadly, they didn't like Yanukovych. They wanted to join the EU. And you have to remember, though, that there's a lot of people in Ukraine who also oppose the EU. That's why Yanukovych was democratically elected, and they had to force him out to appoint someone who was pro-EU, which was Petro Poroshenko. They couldn't get it done through a vote because there weren't enough pro-EU voices within Ukraine. So they had to install him through a violent coup.
All right. Let's continue on. Scrolling back up here. So my name is Jeffrey for $20 again. Yeah, that's the same question. Yeah, sorry, I copied and pasted his question because he'd sent in another 2 super chats. So thanks for that other $10 there, Jeffrey. That's appreciated. No pay. I'm not sure if that's how they want it done. €5. Switch positions and explain without emotional appeal. What kind of evidence would it take to convince you to change your mind for science? So if you were in each other's shoes, what would be the thing that would change your mind and make you think that, the otherwise? So I guess I'll just ask it individually here for the super chatter. Jackson, if you thought the war was unjustified, what would be the thing that you would say that makes it justified? What would be that one thing that you would say that put me over?
Oh, well, isn't that kind of what I just spent the whole time talking about? I think a more interesting argument would be if I was in Drew, what would prompt me to take Drew's position at this point?
I think the way they phrased it, that might be what they want, but it seems like they're kind of looking for like that opposite approach. But I do agree with you that I think it would be a little more interesting to say like, what would convince you, Jackson?
Okay, well, incorrect? Yeah, my answer to their question would be everything I guess I said throughout the entirety of this debate, because that is all the proof, and that's as much as I can do to argue. So, that is right. That's what it's asking. As for what would convince me to flip in Drew's position, I don't know if I could ever flip in Drew's position, but something that would make me say I don't support Russia anymore in their military operation is if they decided that they were going to roguely start attacking civilians. That would be something. If they disproportionately decided to escalate the war, that's something. Those are 2 big ones.
Okay. And what about you, Drew? So I think we'll keep on theme with that. What would change your mind at this point if you found out? Is there a piece of information that you can think of that you'd be like, okay, the war in Russia is justified? What would be something that you would turn your table kind of deal?
Look, if Ukraine had launched an invasion of Russia in 2022, that brutally targeted civilians, that was, a war of imperial conquest. It was based on the magical thinking that there was no such thing as a Russian nation and that all Russians must be subordinated to the Ukrainians, then I would not support Ukraine. So you would have to basically flip the entire scenarios from Russia being the aggressor and Ukraine being the defender to Ukraine being the aggressor and Russia being the defender. That would be the one thing that would change my mind. But that's not happening because Russia is ultimately the one that launched the war of aggression and imperial conquest.
All right. Let's try to continue on from there. So that was no pay we got from that. Harlod, Shacklebond, $5. Can you just Google his opinion already, Jackson? He has a mainstream media source for you to explain. So we can move on from there, but I think they're calling you out a little bit, Drew, and talking to Jackson. I think they're calling you out for using mainstream talking points. So you guys can elaborate on that if you'd like, or we can just move on because it's not super, we kind of hammered, I think, those ideas, but it's up to you guys.
I don't know. Like, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground already regarding that. Like, we've done like 3 hours worth of discussion.
I think we've covered where we think our arguments are coming from. So I'm sorry if we don't get into too much elaboration, but we do have a lot of super chats that have a bit more to them. So we're just going to continue. Question for you though, that's a little off the wall. Why you go boss Z for $5 says, Drew, would you consider a debate with the guy from the Duran? Maybe
From where? Sorry.
from the Duran, it's called, or Duran. I'm not sure. It says maybe it could be set up. That might be somebody to look into. So if you don't know who it is, we'll check it out. And
Spell it. I don't know. I don't know.
Duran.
Look, I don't know who they're referring to right now. So
I have no idea either. So let's continue on and keep it on point. But we'll check that out later. Thanks for the suggestion there, you go boss, and your $5 in the super chat there. Threat to democracy. Now you need to stop popping up here in my copy and paste list. H&L 999. Drew, your moral crusade for Ukraine children will not denuclearize Russia. Free trade and expanding pacifying Western culture over people surrender nukes, South Africa. And then it says, don't kill me. I'm not sure if that's...
Wait, sorry, what was it?
So I think the overall thing here is your moral crusade for Ukraine children will not denuclearize Russia. Free trade and expandifying... so they're saying that free trade and expanding pacifying Western culture will. So I'm not,
okay.
I'm not
I
sure if you
really
have any
know.
thoughts
Like, I
on that.
mean, not really sure necessarily what they're trying to get at. Like, I don't think countries change through trade. Pretty much, Russia and China have basically demonstrated the fallacy of that idea.
All right, let's continue on. Now there's a new one. My name is Jeffrey. $10. JP, does the West similarly enslave country through predatory IMF loans? Doesn't the West support the Islamist, known for human rights abuses in Syria, as admitted by the U.S. DoD, concern you? Over to you there, Jackson.
You know what? So what was the question again? We've been going on for so long.
I understand. And it's getting a
something
little
about the IMF. The IMF enslaves everybody. So here's the point I'll make about the IMF. The reason why Drew is such a cuck to the West is because the West will go to any extent imaginable to try and preserve the dollar and preserve their hold on not only resource production, but, making sure that they have appropriate buyers. And this war in Ukraine, there's a lot of reasons for it. But the main reason for this, the main reason for the coup, the main reason for the Western effort to depose Putin is that they are worried that Russia is sovereign. They are worried that Russia and China are sovereign. They're working together. They're building BRICS. They're going to replace the dollar global reserve currency. They're worried that Russia is one of the largest commodity holding nations and commodities producing nations in the world, and they had a pretty good relationship with Europe prior to this war beginning. And they're worried that at the end of the day, Russia and China might be able to overpower Western hegemonic forces in terms of, purchasing power, GDP, their international relations. And that is also now happening because, BRICS already surpasses the EU. And there's 30 plus countries applying to join BRICS. And that is without a doubt going to surpass the economic holds that the West has held for so many years upon the rest of the world in a chokehold. And that's why this is all happening. I mean, it does have to do with economics. It has to do with the Malthusian economic agenda that is pushed by so many in the West. And it's age-old fight of, should we produce more and grow more, whether it was communism, whether it's, whatever we have in Russia today or the communism of China versus the Western degrowth Malthusian agenda of degrowth and depopulation.
All right, let's try continue on. And from my name is Jeffrey again for $10. Thanks again, Jeffrey. JP, isn't there a hypocrisy in claiming NATO/EU stands for anti-IMP or anti-imp while they are supporting? I'm gonna butcher this. While they are supporting Azerbaijan and its ethnic cleansing of Armenians and Artsec via cutting supply from entering the region. Excuse me if I butchered that, but I hope that all makes sense. Isn't there hypocrisy in claiming NATO/EU stands for anti-imp while they are supporting Azerbaijan and its ethnic cleansing of Armenians and the Artsakh?
Actually, I actually am very angry about the EU supporting Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is waging pretty open ethnic cleansing and genocidal warfare against the Armenians. I very much oppose the EU gas deals with Azerbaijan. That's a horrible thing that they're doing.
All right. Any thoughts there, Jackson, where that was for you, or do you want to continue on from there? That might be a moment of agreement.
Yeah, there's any number of countries you could point to. The former Yugoslavia, Libya, I think are the ones that most people point to.
All right. Let's continue on. Otter for $5. Actually, yeah, let's see here. Otter, in quotations, I think we should kill Ukrainians. There can't be any other talk. Dugin said in one video addressed to his followers at the time in August 21st, 2022. Simple Google search. So, do either of you know who this Duggan guy is that they're talking about, or Dugin, or?
Dugan,
Yeah, I mean, like Drew probably wants me to respond to that. He's already we've discussed this, but I already claimed I don't support the killing of civilians in Ukraine. I think everyone knows Dugan's talking about the Ukrainian government and military apparatus. But even that, I don't support the killing of the government. I think they should be dealt with at an international tribunal, but I don't support their killing. And I think that, Dugan, his daughter was killed by Ukrainian intelligence car bombing operation. He's probably very upset, and that's why he said that.
Right. And your thoughts on that, Drew? Because I think
Dugan called for the genocide of Ukrainians in 2014. That quote's from 2014. And that's why he was targeted by the Ukrainians with the attempted assassination. Unfortunately, they didn't get Dugan. They got his daughter. His daughter was still a genocidal supporter of the invasion of Ukraine. So, but it's a sad thing that they didn't get Dugan. I mean, Dugan is a straight up genocider. He wants genocide against Ukrainians. That's what he's been pushing for more than, almost 9 years now. And it's just sad that Ukraine hasn't gotten Dugan yet.
All right. Let's continue on here. And I'm so sorry if anybody in the super chat feels like we didn't get around to digging into your question. Whatever answer we do get, that is how our speaker is answering that question. So, and any confusion we will try to sort out. So,
I have a question. When did Dugan say that? Like, can you cite the actual source?
2014.
But like where? Because I always see people say that he said that, and I've never seen any evidence. I've never really cared because there's so many lies. But just find the moment in which he said that for me, and you can take some time. But
I actually have the original Facebook post, but it's in Russian, and I obviously don't speak Russian.
Okay, well, can you send it to me on Twitter?
Yes, I'll share it on Twitter.
All right.
Kidding.
Did you want to do that now, or did you want to carry on with the Q&A? So I don't mind.
Oh yeah, continue on. I'm gonna look at it.
All right, yeah, because we can do screen shares, we can do review. That's fine. So let's continue on. Outer for another $5. If Putin is not a dictator, then why did he get rid of term limits? He was a president for 2 terms, 8 years, and is on his 11th consecutive year.
Putin?
If Putin is not a dictator, then why did he get rid of term limits? That's
okay, why did Angela Merkel serve for 10 plus years as Chancellor of Germany? Is she a dictator? Drew, I'm still waiting for the.
I'm posting it now. Firstly, I don't even like Merkel. She's an idiot. But secondly, Man, you can't vote against Putin in Russia. It's impossible. You can't oppose him. Do you think a Russian election could depose Putin? It's impossible.
All right. Well, let's continue on. Threat to democracy. 499. You need to stop popping up here. All right. Harold Sullivan. Yeah, I was gonna say nothing wrong with his question. It's just that I must have copied and pasted it at least 3 times here. So I keep reading it and I'm like, how did that get here again? Harold Sullivan. 499. Harold. In the past, Drew called for breaking up of Russia through NATO intervention. So by his logic,
Drew, where's the
I'm posting it, Jackson. Give it a second, man.
How long does it take to post this? Because
I'm giving the exact image.
I thought you said you had the Facebook posts.
All right. So
yes, I'm getting it. I'm finding it.
And by the way, again, you claimed that he called for the genocide and the mass killing of Ukrainians. So let's hope that's in there because I've
got the genocide one and I'm getting the kill one. The kill one was why he got sacked from his position at a Russian university.
Okay, so let's see it.
I'm getting it.
All right, when you get that, just let us know, and we'll do a screen share. We'll check it out. That's no problem. It always adds better context. So the question is from Harold Sullivan, 499. In the past, Drew has called for the breaking up of Russia through NATO intervention. By his logic, he would be no better than Dugin. So
no,
over to you, Drew.
No, because I've called for the decolonization of Russia and the imprisoned indigenous peoples of Russia. I've not called for the military breakup of Russia. I'm calling for decolonization.
Drew, do you support the decolonization of America too?
I certainly support self-determination for the indigenous peoples of America.
So you support like the United? So you say
certainly be reparations and things like this.
No, but do you support decolonization, like America turning the land back to Indians?
In some cases, yes.
What about the Indians who took the land from other Indians? Do you think that those Indians should then give the land back to the first Indians who had it?
That is something that the colonizers like to say. They like to pretend that there were no indigenous peoples in the original area. They like to pretend that indigenous peoples.
When did I say that?
No, this is the subtext of what you're saying.
No, I'm saying Indians had fights over different territory over years.
Not in every single case.
Yeah, but hypothetically, if we gave the land back to a certain tribe of Indians, like the Ahichman Indians, would you say to those Ahichman that they should then turn the land back over to the Indians that held the land prior to the Ahichman?
Listen, Jackson. What I'm talking about is, in some cases, there should be land redistributions for indigenous peoples. It's very simple, very obvious. There should be more economic opportunity for indigenous peoples. If considering America and Canada and Australia are democracies and we can democratically vote on these resolutions, we should do this democratically. We should talk about self-determination for indigenous peoples, and we should talk about reparations for past historical injustices. We should talk about that democratically. But considering Russia's not a democracy, I support efforts to break up the current regime there and help the indigenous peoples who are imprisoned and colonized.
I support giving the Novorossiya region back to the indigenous Russians. And I also support giving Kiev. I'm not done.
They're not indigenous to that area. If anything, Russia wiped out the indigenous Tatar inhabitants of that area.
I'm not done. I'm also supportive of the idea of turning the Kiev Oblast region over to the indigenous Mongols.
That's fucking stupid, man.
Well, the Mongol invasion.
Russia was the country that was occupied by the Mongols. It was not Ukraine. Kiev was not occupied by Mongols.
Oh, so you admit that when you make that faulty argument that you made at starting off our debate that Kiev Rus was actually Ukrainian and that wasn't all Russian?
Yes, it was. It was. Kiev and Rus was Ukrainian and the Mongols did not take Kiev.
They did take Kiev, actually. You want to make a bet on that?
Okay, fair. So they did take Kiev, but
fucking idiot. Fucking idiot.
but I think it's
Turn
very
Kiev over back to the Mongols.
Russia spent centuries under the Mongols, whereas Ukraine comparatively had a far lesser historical experience there.
Kiev spent the better part of the 13th century under the Mongols, if I'm not mistaken. And listen, I mean, I say we turn Kiev back over to the Mongols, indigenous Mongols.
I think we should turn Russia back over to the indigenous Mongol inhabitants of who conquered Russia during the 14th century.
Only if we turn Kiev also and all of Ukraine over to the Mongols.
No, I disagree with that.
All right, well, let's continue on. Dana McWhite, 499. Why does Ukraine have streets named after Nazis, stadiums, and holidays for war criminals that are World War II that killed Jews?
I'm just going to
Still
straight up
waiting on
say
that
I don't
genocide
like
comment.
Bandera. I'm just going to say straight up I don't like Bandera. I don't like the OUN, the radical extremist right wing in Ukraine. I don't like that, and I don't like how they ignore the history of that, because you know the OUN carried out ethnic cleansing against Poles and Jews, and that is just horrific. It's wrong. Should be historically remembered. And you know, Zelensky. But let's not get bogged down in the details here, because Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, elected by 70% of the Ukrainian people, Zelensky is the descendant of Holocaust victims themselves, and the radical right wing today in Ukraine is marginalized because they didn't even get 2%. They didn't even clear the 2% threshold to enter the parliament. So the radical right is not represented in Ukrainian politics.
So Drew is doing this stupid goalposting where he says, oh, you know, I don't want to talk about this. Let's not talk about this. Okay, but Drew supports all the ideological inheritors of Stefan Bandera and the OUN.
No, I don't.
He supported the takeover of Petro Poroshenko, who posthumously gave the Hero of Ukraine award to Stefan Bandera. And, you know, everyone who's pro-Ukraine, they talk about how there's no Nazis in the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada, the parliament, or the government post-2019. But they never bring up 2014 to 2019, because that's when you had all of the Ukrainian nationalists, Azovites, Right Sector, Trident. You had all these figures in the Verkhovna Rada. You had Olya Tanyabuk within the presidential administration, and he was actually involved in the negotiations that they were trying to pursue before there was a coup, representing, of course, the nationalists and the coup backers. And so, you know, Drew goalposts. He says, I don't support these people, but he supports their ideological inheritors who are now leading up a lot of these nationalist military ranks. And Drew, I'm still waiting on the comment from Dugan where he supported genociding Ukraine and killing.
Yes,
Ukraine.
I posted it. I just posted it then on my Twitter.
All right, let's just try to. All right, so if you wanna do a screen share, we can check it out together if you'd like in real time. That might be useful for our live chat as well. Are you guys okay with that?
Yeah, I'll send.
Yeah, if you can share your screen here, just choose which one, and
Hey,
then
I just messaged it to you on Twitter.
Okay, I was gonna say I can't share my screen on this end where I'm hosting as well, so you'd have to share on your end if you want to put it on the live stream. If not, that's okay. We can continue on with Q&A, but it might be something that can drive some context as far as what you guys were talking about. So it's up to you.
I just have to. Hang on.
Yeah, take your time. Sorry, did you have a question there, Jackson?
So this says Ukraine needs to be cleansed of idiots.
Did you want to share your screen there, Jackson, and watch it from your side?
Well, the quote is, I'll read out the quote.
Okay. That works too, I guess.
Ukraine needs to be cleansed of idiots. A genocide of cretins suggests itself. Cretins who are virulent, closed from the voice of Logos, deadly, and in addition to this, extremely stupid. I don't believe that these are Ukrainians. Ukrainians are fine Slavic people, but these are some race of bastards that emerged from the sewage. So he's saying, I like some Ukrainians, but the others have to be genocided. That is what Dugan said.
Okay. Well, that's his opinion.
Yeah, and is a key ideologue of the Kremlin regime.
No, he's never met
Key
Putin,
ideologue of the Kremlin regime. And
he's never met Putin, so I don't know why you're saying that. But what he's clearly saying is that there's certain people within Ukraine that represent a very toxic Nazi ideology, and it is no different.
That's your interpretation.
Well, no, it's not an interpretation. Let me reread.
Calls for genocide. Straight up calls for genocide.
No. He said Ukraine needs to be cleansed of idiots, a genocide of cretins. Okay, so he's saying people.
Oh, okay, so because he defines them as cretins, then it's a justified genocide.
I'm not justifying anything. I'm just simply saying this is no different than Putin's stated goal of denazification.
All right, let's continue on.
Wait, sorry, say that again. Say that again, Jackson.
This is no different than Putin's stated goal of denazification.
Yes, because that is actually cover for genocide. The term denazification is actually a term that the Russians are using to mean genocide of the Ukrainian people.
I'm not justifying anything.
The fact that you actually say Dugan's statement calling for genocide is representative of denazification is very telling.
All I'm saying here is that you think that anyone who promotes the war effort of Russia should be killed. That's your words, not mine.
No. I'm only saying the top couple propagandists in Russia. So, for example, Solovyov, Dugan, these are the people that are justified military targets. I'm not saying that Jackson should. I don't believe in that.
You said Dugan's daughter, and she's not a high-ranking official. She's not popular.
Well, as I said, it's unfortunate that they got.
She's not a journalist.
Look, Jackson.
No, you keep saying that it's unfortunate that Dugan wasn't also killed.
Yeah, I know. It's sad.
So let me just finish my statement.
They could have gotten Dugan without Daria.
We'll let you finish up there, Jackson, and then we'll kick it back over to you, Drew.
So I'm not justifying anything. I think anyone who justifies this should have their YouTube channel banned. But what I'm saying is that Putin has a stated goal of there's Nazis in Ukraine who won't stop killing the ethnic Russians despite however many peace deals. So we need to pursue denazification. And that is no different than the statement that Dugan put forward.
Yes, because Dugan is calling for genocide and Putin is also calling for genocide.
And you're calling for a genocide of those that didn't even participate. No. Let me finish. No, you're calling.
Wrong.
Yes.
It's a lie.
You're calling for
Daria Dugina is not a genocide, Jackson.
Let me finish. You're calling for a genocide of those who, quote unquote, in a high profile way, aided and abetted the war effort.
No. Jackson, if they could have gotten Dugan without his daughter, that would have been much better. I agree. However, it's unfortunate they got his daughter.
Why did you say she deserved to die earlier in this debate? You said she deserved to die.
I'm not going to like shed tears for her because she did support the genocide of Ukraine. So I'm not going to shed tears.
That's different than saying she deserved to die.
Well, look, in some sense, she did deserve it morally. I think it would have been better if they got her father rather than her. But look, like, at the end of the day, she supported the genocide of the Ukrainian people. She went to Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. She was supporting genocide, and she was a justified military target, just as, like, for example, the editor of Der Stürmer was a justified target at the end of the World War.
So journalists now are justified.
No, she's not a journalist. She's a Russian state television propagandist. And Solovyov is also a justified military target. So is Dugan.
So does that make the host of CNN during the Iraq War a justified military target for all Iraqis?
No, because CNN's not state media.
Really? Why?
Yes, I don't like CNN. I don't watch it, but it's not the same as Russian television propaganda.
What about NPR or the BBC?
Again, I don't really watch them. I don't really like them.
No. This brings up
they don't have editorial policy.
Let me finish this. You talked over me the entire debate, so let me finish this. So as the BBC is championing the cause of Tony Blair to take this genocidal war in Iraq on for the British people, you're telling me that BBC hosts who are championing this are not justified military targets for all Iraqis, but Russian, state media hosts or people who've appeared on Russian state TV in a high-profile sense, who've championed the war cause of Russia, are justified military targets? Do you understand the logic?
I will list to you the justified military targets. Solovyov, Dugan, a couple other top Russia television propagandists inside Russia, because these are the people that are actually trying to recruit people to go kill innocent Ukrainians. This is very obvious. These people support genocide. They're calling for genocide right now. I'm not calling for, I'm saying targeted on Solovyov and Dugan. That's very justified, I think. And also, Prigozhin, some of the top Wagner leaders, these are military targets. And, if they weren't invading Ukraine, if they weren't trying to torture innocent people and kill innocent people, then they wouldn't be military targets. Pretty obvious, isn't it?
do you think that the Iraqi military would have justification in taking out the president or the prime minister, whatever dumb shit you have in your country, and the entire administrative cabinet of Australian leadership?
Obviously, I wouldn't have agreed with that. They would have tried it because it's a war.
But is it a justified military target? No,
because I'm not. This is stupid.
Why?
Because
the commander-in-chief.
Because I didn't support the Iraqi military. I'm saying. So it's in a war. They probably tried to do that.
So the commander-in-chief,
for example, is trying to.
All right, let's let Jackson speak, please. Nobody can hear when you're both talking over each other. Actually, we'll let Drew wrap it up. I was gonna say, I know that you're.
Expose your whole argument here because you just told me. I just exposed the whole fraud of your argument. So you're telling me that the commander-in-chief of a military is not a just military target?
No, they would have tried to target. Like, obviously.
But you said that it's not a just military target. Let me finish talking.
Let's let
Drew. You said that the Australian...
It's pretty obvious.
All right, Jackson, let's let Drew inject here.
I'm just going to mute you if you're going to do this. I'll just mute you for my audience.
Can I respond?
Thank you. Yeah, as soon as I'm done.
Well, sorry, Jackson. You did interrupt him first.
No, I'm going to finish my statement here because he interrupted me before.
All right, we'll give you 15 seconds.
The commander-in-chief of Australia is somehow not a just military target, but a 29-year-old girl who's a journalist who goes on Russian state TV is a just military target. Your argument is bullshit.
No, let me respond. I'm saying, look, if I was the Iraqi military during 2003, they would have tried it, and they started a war. It makes sense, but I don't support the Iraqi military, so that's why I'm against it.
But on the basis of principle, you'd recognize that the commander-in-chief, at least, is a just military target, right?
Look, military commanders are justified military targets. That's pretty obvious. That doesn't mean that I would necessarily agree with killing, a prime minister. I don't agree with that because I'm not supporting the Iraqi military. But I'm against Darya Dugina because she's supporting the invasion of an innocent country.
Okay, but she's not a military commander.
She essentially made herself a combatant by going to occupied Mariupol and trying to recruit people to the military, trying to support the genocide of Ukraine.
But the host of the BBC is not a just military target during Iraq?
No, it's not a just military target because the BBC is not controlled by the Kremlin.
But it's controlled by the British government.
No, it's not. Its editorial line is not dictated by the British government.
Well, so does RT.
No, RT is controlled by the Kremlin and its editorial line is pushed by the Kremlin. BBC is controlled by the British government, but it is not actually... It's funded by the British government, but it doesn't have an editorial line that is directed by the British government.
Actually, you're wrong about that because there's been countless reporters on RT who have criticized the Russian government and even criticized things like the annexation of Crimea. So you're wrong about that. And the British government fell exactly in line with the Blair administration, or the BBC fell directly in line with the Blair administration when he took their country to war in Iraq. And somehow you're saying that RT is a justified military target, but or TOS or whoever you're talking about.
Jackson, I'm not saying the average RT journalist. I'm not supporting that. I'm talking about the top propaganda figures in Russia today. Dugan, Solovyov. These people are military targets because they are every day.
So Dugan's daughter, Darya Dugina, 29-year-old woman who was on Russian state TV, and she wasn't even a host. She was just on it. So she is a just military target. But the hosts of the
Dugan, it would have been better if they got.
But the hosts of the BBC championing the war in Iraq are not just military targets for the Iraqi military.
I don't support the Iraqi military.
All right, well, let's continue on where we've kind of divulged into that there. Drew, Ukraine. Oh, sorry, from Dana McWhite.
Oh, well, according to here's a source. She's the chief editor of a disinformation website run by Prigozhin, who controls Wagner. So yeah, she's a fucking combatant because Prigozhin is a combatant.
All right,
where's your proof for that?
He was working directly for Wagner. Yes, combatant.
Where's your proof for that?
I don't want to have to cut you off there, but I will say,
send you the source.
I was going to say, we have been going for almost 3.5 hours here, and we do have a few more super chats to get through. I know that's a little bit more than what you guys probably signed up for originally when we had pitched this, but you guys are...
Yeah, I do have to head soon.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, I'm letting you guys drive the conversation where you guys want to put it, but...
Yeah, I got one more question. So how is Dugan, you mentioned that Dugina was on Russian TV or something. How is Dugan, who's just a philosopher, never met Putin, how is he a justified military target?
Dugan's not just a philosopher. He was advocating the genocide of Ukrainians, and he was directly employed by Malafeev and Malafeev was working for the Kremlin. So, yes, Dugan was a Kremlin operative.
Appointed to what?
Dugan was the top propagandist on Malafeev's propaganda channel. And Malafeev is a top Putin ally. So, yes,
but these
Dugan
are journalists.
is part of the Russian state apparatus.
These are journalists, philosophers who've never met with Putin.
They're not journalists and philosophers. They're enemy combatants.
He's a philosopher. He never went to war. He never made a war.
Dugan is a combatant. The point he's saying, he's calling for a genocide against Ukrainians. He's a combatant.
That unfortunately does not, for your argument here, make anyone a combatant calling for a genocide of a certain people. It just simply doesn't.
Maybe not legally under international law, but it is certainly morally justified.
Well, you've had no regard for international law throughout the duration of this conversation.
Neither have the Russians.
All right, let's try to continue on because we do like.
If you cared about international law, you would be against the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
All right, let's try to continue on.
So, do college professors who championed the war in Iraq at Harvard or Princeton University, are they just military targets because they were calling for the genocide of the Iraqi people based on a lie?
All right, hold on.
There was no genocide of the Iraqi people. I am against the Iraqi war, but there wasn't a genocide of the Iraqi people. And I also fundamentally do not
There's
support...
far more of a genocide. Last thing here. There's far more of a genocide against the people of Iraq with millions dead than the tallies right now in the statistics of civilians dead in Ukraine, which amasses to about like 8,000.
I am fine. I'm fine. Sorry, Drew. I don't mean to cut you off there. I am fine to let the conversation keep going in the open format, but I will say that we do have enough questions that I think whatever you guys need to get out of your system as far as like the talking points, I think we're going to get to them. Because like I said, we do have enough super chats here that if we keep having back and forth, we might not get through all of them.
I get it.
Sorry,
Drew needs to get a bunch of lipids out of his system as well.
Well, I was gonna say, I gotta get my stardom out here as well. Everybody have a look. Right here I am. No, I'm kidding. Drew from Dana McWhite, $9.99. Drew, Ukraine has government websites that sell Ukraine women for prostitution online. I can send you over 10 links of this. It sounds like, Dana, you might be a bit of a salesman. Are you trying to sell us something here? I'm not sure what's going on. Let's continue on from there. Damien, $5. Jackson, you cry about Dugin, but are silent about Russia bombing Ukraine citizens and causing millions of refugees. Oh, let me read the questions. You are silent about Russia bombing Ukrainian citizens and causing millions of refugees. How dare you, they say in a Christopher Hitchens type way at the end there. How dare you? So they're saying you cry about Dugin, but are silent about Russia bombing Ukraine citizens and causing millions of refugees. Thoughts on that, Jackson?
Exactly.
I shed no tear over the crimes of Nazis, and the only reason why I have no problem with what the Russians are doing is because the Ukrainians have turned these civilian hostage situations into active military targets. Amnesty International proved that, and Drew is still fat.
Jackson supports the genocide of the Ukrainian people. He supports mass murder, torture, rape of children and women in Ukraine. And he wants us to cry over Daria Dugina. Fuck that. I'm not going to cry over Daria Dugina. All right. She supported the genocide. She supported the rape and torture and murder of civilians too.
Well, you guys opened the door on the ad homs there, so I did everything I could live chat to try to keep it civil here. But we're getting extra juicy, and there's not a whole lot I can do about that because I don't want to be putting these guys on mute every couple of minutes here. And they're not talking over each other too much. There's a bit of interruption, but we're doing what we can. So Smithy for $5. Drew, why you support acts of terrorism on civilian by car bombing and call yourself a human right activist? Don't dodge this question by using your dog. So there's been a couple questions here. We're just going to wrap them all up about something about a car bombing. I don't know.
Yeah,
there's some
Daria
video out there.
Dugina was killed in a car bomb. As I said, it would have been much more preferable if they got her father, who was, basically the top Russia pro-genocide propagandist today. Would have been much more preferable if they got her father. Daria herself did, however, work for Wagner, and she was a supporter of genocide in Ukraine.
She did not work for Wagner. That's a lie.
She worked for Wagner's chief, Prigozhin.
No, that's a lie.
And these, if you're talking about terrorism, she's the one. Her father, Prigozhin, Solovyov, every day they're advocating terror bombing raids on Ukrainian civilians. They're advocating the genocide of Ukrainians. Hundreds of thousands have been
advocating that.
Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been killed already. The Russians, the Putin and the Russians, they were crowing over how they were going to starve and freeze the Ukrainians to death in the winter. They were crowing about that. They've targeted civilian infrastructure at the very start of the conflict. They've carried out genocidal war crimes all across the country. And if you're going to talk about, Daria Dugina, that's an act of terrorism. No, the act of terrorism is Russia invading Ukraine and terrorizing the Ukrainian people. Just yesterday, we saw school children terror, fleeing for their lives.
Wrap it up.
You're saying wrap it up about
Stop crying. Wrap it up.
So again,
crocodile tears.
Jackson thinks it's funny. Jackson thinks it's funny that Ukrainian school children are terrorized.
Jackson, we're going to give him 20 seconds.
Jackson thinks it's funny. Jackson thinks it's funny when Ukrainian school children are terrorized by missiles indiscriminately hitting Kiev. Jackson thinks it's funny. So if anyone here is inhumane and supporting terrorism, it's Jackson, not me. I'm supporting Ukraine's effort to defend itself, and the people who the top Russian propagandists inside Russia who support genocide, they should not live comfortable lives.
Wrap it up.
Let's
wrap it up.
Yeah.
No, I have to respond briefly to that.
That's fine. But we want to try to keep it to 30 seconds if that's cool.
Okay, and please don't interrupt me for the next 30 seconds. So what's so crazy and just blatantly asinine about Drew's argument here is he says, well, Daria Dugina, who is a journalist, should be killed by the Ukrainians because she allegedly, I don't even buy this, I haven't seen this, but let's just take his argument at face value. She allegedly was a journalist for a media outlet that was owned by the Wagner chief.
Shut
the fuck up, you fat fuck. So she was a journalist for the journalistic outlet that was in part owned by Yevgeny Prigozhin, who also, in coordination with owning many businesses, he owns, I guess, this journalistic outlet. So, and he owns Wagner. So by that logic, then you could make the argument that a janitor at the White House is a justified military target for the Iraqi military during
because Daria was not a janitor. She was a fucking top propagandist of the Russian regime, advocating genocide, helping recruit people to kill.
And I also say that if it wasn't for every janitor, every single gardener at the White House, the goals and the stated, day-to-day.
So why don't you say that, Jackson? Jackson, why don't you say that? Do you support killing White House staff?
All right, I'm going to inject the question here. We got another question.
And the goals and the stated tasks, daily tasks of the White House would never be able to be completed. And,
okay, so you want to
Drew, we're going to let him wrap up.
This whole argument does fall apart when you ask Drew the simple question. Drew, do you support the Ukrainian military attacking Russian civilians?
No.
Really?
I don't support attacking civilians, only the top propagandists and military. I support Ukraine defending itself, destroying the Russian military, top Russian government leaders and top Russian government propagandists who are mobilizing support for the war.
All right.
So you disagree with the recent events in which the Ukrainians sent explosive strapped drones into Moscow and hit civilian targets?
What do you have to say about Russia hitting civilian targets in Kyiv every day of the war for fucking 450 days?
It's a simple question.
There's nothing to say on that.
Simple question.
Simple question. You support civilian infrastructure attacked by Russia every day.
All right, let's continue on. No, we're not continuing on with this type of dialogue.
Such insane hypocrisy.
Answer the
question.
Asking
me.
We have Q&A. We have Q&A, and it is not.
Yet the Ukrainians are suffering.
Sorry, Drew. All right. Like I said, I don't want to. I'm going to open up the Zoom call. Don't make me open up the Zoom call. I'm trying to keep an eye on the YouTube. All right, come on, guys. Keep things easy on me if you can. All right. open question. Putin is good. Discuss. That's from Captain Waffles. We're going to do 1 minute back and forths. We're going to try not to interrupt each other and try not to speak about each other the best that we can. So over to you, Drew. 1 minute. Putin's good. Discuss.
War criminal, genocidaire, somebody who wants to return Russia, Ukraine, centuries into the past, into a past of imperial conquest and Tsardom and mass repression. He is one of the biggest thieves in the world because he has stolen so much from the Russian people. And, you know, this is somebody who has sanctioned the rape of Ukrainian civilians, the torture of Ukrainian civilians, the bombing of Ukrainian civilians, the rape of Ukrainian civilians. Ukrainian kids have been raped by Russian troops at points in this war. So Putin is responsible for all these crimes. He's a horrible war criminal. He's a horrible genocidal war criminal. And the world will be so much better when Putin is denazified and he goes to hell. And he goes to hell and he endures 10,000 years of hell as punishment for his crimes.
All right, over to you, Jackson. 1 minute there. Putin's good. Thoughts?
It's funny, the commander-in-chief of the war criminals of the Australian military is not a justified military target, but Drew wants Putin dead. Okay, so, yeah, Putin is good. I don't like everything Putin's done, but overall, I mean, like, anyone
it's
really
because
agree
Australia is good and
on everything?
All right, we muted you, Drew.
Yeah, you need to shut your fat mouth, okay?
No, do not. Like I said, if you say that one more time, we're going to have to kick you out. I got so many super chats. I don't want you guys to break the rules and get yourself booted.
He just can't.
All right, I will mute you as well because I'm talking right now, and where I'm moderating this debate, I have to keep some level of control. We don't want to get it demonetized. We want to respect the rules, and we don't want to drive our live chat away by just mudslinging. So let's try to follow the rules that I've put forward here. I will kick you guys out. I'm sorry. I'm going to be straight honest with you.
Anymore.
Thank you.
So as long as he doesn't interrupt me. Okay. So, you know, anyways, Putin good. Yeah. I mean, no one can agree with everyone on everything, but Putin overall is taking us into the multipolar world. He, just like Stalin, is putting up the main fight against Nazism as it presents itself in 2023. You know, Stalin basically did it single-handed. I know Drew's like one of those LARPers that says, oh, what about Lend-Lease? But no, it was Stalin who did it all. And Lend-Lease did basically nothing. And, you know, for 2 years, they refused to open up the Western Front. So Stalin-based, Putin-based, Putin's taking us into a new multipolar order, freeing millions of people from the economic chokehold that the West has you know, placed around the necks of individuals in Africa and Latin America and, you know, all across the world for so long. So I'm very happy to see Putin in power.
All right. And yeah, let's continue on with our super chats. And like I say, don't take any personal offense, anybody in the super chat. I'm just trying to keep everything moving along here, as our subject of the debate is Russia's war on Ukraine justified? That's what we're talking about. Excuse me. So Alexandros, €5. Why does Drew call Jihadi Arslan Haydiat bro, given he denies Greek and Armenian genocides, says Cyprus belongs to Turkey, and celebrates Hagia Sophia? Now, I don't know what a lot of that means, so I'll let you expound. Over to you, Drew. You're still muted, Drew. Sorry, we'll get you off there.
What's the question?
So the question is, why does Drew call Jihadi Arslan Haydiat bro, given he denies Greek and Armenian genocides, says Cyprus belongs to Turkey, and celebrates Hagia Sophia?
I don't know. This is just CCP propaganda against one of the Uyghur journalists. Obviously, I disagree with Arslan on some things, but to call him a jihadi is fucking insane. And it just fits with the CCP propaganda method of calling all the Uyghurs terrorists.
All right. Let's continue on because we still got a lot of questions to get through here. And the quicker we can get them wrapped up, the better, I imagine, at this point, because we are going to probably wrap up at around the 4-hour point if we keep going the way we're going. So $5 from Otter says, please look up Scott Ritter on Google and see what shows up. Have Jackson explain his association with him.
I'll explain my association with him as soon as someone saves Drew's dog and stops him from fucking his dogs.
Okay, straight up, this is just fucking insane by Jackson. Jackson is friends with a known pedophile. somebody who was convicted as a sex offender, Scott Ritter. He tried to
your dogs. You
tried to rape a
dogs.
15-year-old.
You fuck your dogs.
Scott Ritter tried to rape a
You are
15-year-old,
muted.
and
I'm sorry,
Jackson's friends with
Jackson.
him.
The next
Jackson
step
is
I'm gonna
friends
kick
with
you
a
out,
man.
so.
Jackson is friends with a Russian propagandist, Scott Ritter, who was convicted for trying to rape a 15-year-old. And he thinks it's funny. And he thinks, oh, blah, blah, blah. It's very funny that he's friends with a rapist pedophile. Funny,
Why do
isn't
you
it?
fuck your dogs?
You can decide just to not answer a
That's
question
very funny,
if you
isn't it,
do
Jackson?
not want to. But if yeah.
Jackson can't answer. Jackson can't
You
answer
fuck
why.
your dogs. Why can't you answer the question as to why you fuck
Jackson,
your
you're
dogs?
friends with a rapist pedophile.
Why
Alright.
do you
You're friends
fuck your
with a
dogs?
rapist
Alright,
pedophile, Scott Ritter.
Why do you fuck
You're
your
friends with a
dogs?
rapist
so many
pedophile. Are you fine with
so-chats.
that?
Why do you fuck your dogs?
Jackson, you
Why
can't
do you-
answer
why do
with a
you fuck
rapist
your dogs?
pedophile.
I'm
You can't
scratching my
answer the
head here,
question
guys,
why you fuck
because
your dogs.
if this is all we have to offer, then there's nothing left to offer a live chat. So if you guys want to divulge into this, that's up to you to do that in your own
Let the
space.
record
But you're
state.
not doing that here. We're not going to do any let the record state right now. Like I said, this is the last chance. We're going to go through the super chats, and if you guys can't keep it together, if you can't be respectful, we're going to shut this down. All right? So, last chance. Samir Farsain for $5. JH, Cold War against Ukraine. Euro neighbors aren't seeking NATO's protection from Ukraine. Russia supports U.S. enemies. What are you defending?
What?
That's from Samir Farsain. $5.
Say it one more time.
Cold War wasn't against Ukraine. Euro neighbors aren't seeking NATO's protection from Ukraine. Russia supports U.S. enemies. What are you defending? That's the question. I think I might have just put the emphasis on the wrong syllables.
What am I defending? Well, yeah, I mean, I don't. That was a very oddly phrased question. I don't support the deep state doesn't represent me. So you say America's enemies. Well, that's like George Bush's enemies. And I've got far more in common with the working class people of Russia who are patriots defending their SMO than I do with George Bush. And as for the Cold War, Ukraine actually was involved in the Cold War in a very interesting way. During the Cold War, the CIA utilized Banderites, and even after the fall of the Soviet Union, directly after, CIA protected Bandera, hid him, and encouraged him to pursue his bloody, violent clashes against Soviet officials and civilians all throughout Ukraine. So, yeah, it was obviously very involved in the Cold War, and it was a strategic point, just as it is today in this new hot proxy war with Russia.
All right, let's continue on. Dana McWhite, $9.99. Drew, do you know Kyiv is the original capital of Russia? Also, that's a lie about tanks from the 60s and 70s. You must be too young. The Cold War made Russia sell off everything. Lord of War.
No, Russia is using tanks from 60s and 70s. They're taking out tanks from the stockpiles right now. And sorry, what was the other part of the question?
They said, did you know that Kyiv is the original capital of Russia?
No. Russia didn't even exist as an independent entity until much later. So Kievan Rus was more Ukrainian than Russian, and Russia didn't exist as an independent entity in its own right until much later in history.
All right, let's continue on. For both of you, we'll start over on your side, Jackson. For 1 minute, why is the war taking so long?
Because Putin is not provoked by rogue terror attacks, and his only response to these rogue terror attacks has been either increased bombing of the electrical infrastructure or increased bombing now of the intelligence HQs, which we just saw take place a few moments ago while we were streaming. In Kiev, there was 10 major blasts in Kiev, probably another intelligence HQ getting blown up. And he doesn't let him dates, noteworthy dates or anything like that sway the Russian military or do anything that would be seen as too escalatory or a bad strategy on the battlefield. Their goal is to slowly pick apart the Ukrainian military. And Bakhmut was a meat grinder. They achieved the goal of killing tens of thousands of Ukrainians in Bakhmut. Even the official leaked documents from the Pentagon reported on by the Washington Post prove that to be the case. and far less Russians died, Wagner fighters died in Bakhmut than Ukrainians. So the goal is being achieved by Russia slowly but surely.
All right, let's continue on there.
Can I say something?
Oh, yeah, I
Holy
guess, yeah,
shit.
it was kind of directed at both of you. So yeah, we'll give you up to 30 seconds interrupted there, and we'll continue on.
Russia lost up to 100,000 casualties fighting in Bakhmut. Gherkin himself, one of the top Russian propagandists, the guy who started the war in the Donbas, he called it a self-extermination on the part of the Russian military and on the part of Wagner. He said it was incompetence in the extreme. This is what actual Russian media propagandists are saying. So it's funny, like in the English language media, the Russian propagandists like Jackson Hinkle go, "Oh, Russia's on the cusp of victory. We're so close to total victory." And then if you go listen to the actual Russian media propagandists inside Russia, like Strelkov and Gherkin, he's going, "This was self-extermination. We lost so many men. It was a meat grinder for us." That's what Gherkin said. And every Russian military watcher knows it. They know it was a disaster. He said it was a military disaster because they took a city that's been wiped from the earth after 100,000 casualties, and it doesn't open up any new sections of the front for them. It doesn't create any new strategic opportunities for Russia. It's a disaster for Russia. Wagner's actions in Bakhmut were actually a military disaster for Russia. It was one of the biggest Pyrrhic victories in history.
All right, let's continue on. Chris Marlock, $10. For Drew, how does the United States and NATO expect to contain China when they have pushed Russia into the Chinese sphere? Isn't confrontation with China now dependent on Russian military defeat? That's for you, Drew.
Russia had already decided upon a course of confrontation with the West, which would have ultimately pushed them into the arms of China anyway. So it is Putin and the decision makers in Russia unfortunately decided that they would prefer to be a Chinese vassal than to integrate into Europe and be a normal country, because they were so intent on continuing Russia as an imperial project. They didn't want to just transform Russia into an ordinary nation state that could be integrated into Europe and integrated into the democratic world. Instead, they were focused on pillaging Russia for its natural resources, for their own wealth. And to distract the population from overthrowing them, they created hyper-nationalism to deflect attention, and this forced them into the furnace of Ukraine. This is why they ultimately had to go into Ukraine. It's about regime survival for Putin, but ironically, it's ultimately damaged his regime so much more. So I don't buy the whole argument. Oh, we've got to be friendly with Russia to contain China. No, Russia already decided on a course that would set it on the path of becoming a Chinese vassal. Unfortunately, that is what the Russian decision makers already decided upon.
Oh, well, there you go. We got it right there. So Sam Donji, 275, some sort of currency. I'm not sure how it translates, but 275. Thanks, buddy. Drew, you stand with NATO, US-UK invasion of Iraq. They lie, mass destruct. While looting Iraq, 1.2 million people killed. South Africa called out US, UK for killing 1.2 million people. Do you stand with NATO?
I don't support the war in Iraq, but NATO right now in 2023 is a force for anti-imperialism in the world, because Russia is the one that is carrying out imperialist wars of aggression and conquest. So it's really funny. Jackson and all the other tankies, they call out imperialist wars of aggression when it comes to America invading Iraq, but when it comes to Russia invading Ukraine, an imperialist war of aggression, that's all good. So they're fine with Russian and Chinese imperialism. They just don't like